Corporate Governance Committee meeting. At the council meeting in May, Mr. Barclay was nominated as chairman for this committee. Do I have a seconder?
Yes.
Okay, is that agreed? Okay.
Morning and welcome to today's meeting of the Corporate Governance Committee, which is taking place at County Hall in Glenfield. Though some officers will be joining us via Microsoft Teams. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live via the County Council's website and will also be available for viewing after the meeting. The first substantive item here is the election of the Vice Chair, and I nominate Mr. Richardson to be the Vice Chair. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Mr. Coxon. Is that agreed? Great. Next item is I propose the minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of January 2024 are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is that agreed? Agreed. Question time, we have no questions. Questions asked by members under Standing Order 7. I've received no questions. There are no urgent items. Do members have any declarations of interest that you wish to make? No? Nobody? All right. We have no presentation of petitions under Standing Order number 35. So we're on to item 9, the external audit of the 22-23 accounts, statement of accounts, annual government statement and pension fund accounts updated. The full report for this item is included in the supplementary agenda pack, which was circulated on Wednesday last week and which has been published on the Council's website. Simone Hines, Assistant Director of Corporate Resources, will introduce the item. Then we will have a presentation from Mark Stock from Grant Thornton. So please, Simone, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I am just going to introduce the item very briefly and then hand over to Mark. So the report that you have in front of you presents the updated audit findings report for 22-23 financial year. For noting and any questions, and also ask the committee to approve the letter of representation as well, which are also attached in the pack. The committee did see a draft audit findings report back in January, and at that stage the audit was still ongoing, mostly due to issues with asset valuations at that point. We have now resolved those issues. It has taken a huge amount of time and effort over the last few months to resolve them, even though they actually have no impact on the council's reserves or overall financial position, which I think is just important to note. But the finance team have made the final adjustments. The external audit is largely complete, and Mark will update you on that. And I will now hand over to Mark just to go through the AFR in more detail. But as I said, it is largely just the asset valuation changes that are the difference in this AFR. Most of it you have seen previously. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So this is well, I've got two audit findings reports this morning. One for the accounts, for the council's accounts, and one for the pension fund. So I'll start with the council's accounts. So if I could take you to page 18 of the agenda. I'm pleased to say that this audit is now complete. It has taken rather a lot of effort, both from officers and ourselves, to actually get it complete. There are some big number changes here, and I'll just talk you through those as we move through the report. But as Simone said, these are changes in the asset values on your account. So in terms of, and invariably they're changes to school valuations, or the majority of them. So in terms of decision making, they don't impact on your decision making, because unless you're going to tell me you're going to sell the schools, so which I very, very much doubt. And it, these are all technical adjustments to valuation, so it doesn't actually impact on your usable reserves. It does impact on your unusable reserves, but you don't use those when you're setting the budget. So page 18 just starts to set that out, and in reality what's happened, there's been a misvaluation for a couple of years around school land. That's what it is. It's quite a technical judgment from the valuer as to which parts of the school land are usable and which parts aren't, and are kept for playing fields, and that's driven the change in valuation. So instead of the valuer assuming that all the land is yes, go for it. I'm on page 18 of your agenda. Using your agenda page. So
it's a supplementary. Oh, it's the supplementary pack. Sorry, that's why. Thank you.
No, it's okay. It's all right. So the value was assumed that all the school land was usable for building, but in reality, a lot of it's playing fields. So that comes with a different valuation. So that has driven a significant change. There's also a technical change in terms of how your financial instruments are disclosed within the accounts. Previously, you'd been including grants received in advance. That should be excluded. So we've made that change. And then within your asset base, there's also a number of historic valuations or assets that have been valued on a historic cost basis, and for this year the council's updated those valuations, and that's driven a change in valuation of around £5 million. So I'm just going to just move you down to page 19. We have highlighted in yellow the changes to this report because I didn't really want you to have to go through everything again because it's rather a long report. So this is just to highlight, you know, it has cost a lot of officer time. It has cost a lot of our time to get
Excuse me,
this
if I could just,
done.
sorry to be a nuisance. I've got no idea what page you're on, so bear no relationship to what I've got in my pack, unless I'm missing it.
Yeah. Carry on.
Sorry.
Yeah, there we go. Page 19.
What's that?
Page 19.
It's in the supplementary.
I was in the supplementary. I thought I was in the supplementary one. Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Right, I think we've cleared up. We're in the supplementary pack, so everything ties up.
Okay.
So,
Is everybody else
Yes, Chairman,
able
is
to
it
follow?
if I click onto page 18 of 122, that comes up with financial statements, significant risks, which refers to page 25.
Yes.
It's actually page 12 that's got 19 on the right hand side in the middle. Makes sense. We're looking at the printed 18s and
So we should be looking at,
That's right.
we are looking at the same, are we?
Supplementary is page 18 in the
Yeah.
supplementary.
Right. So it's 19 there, 12.
So I've got two report packs.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I sort of as long as you're all happy.
We're trying to
main
follow,
thing.
but
No. Is everybody else happy? Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Okay. So, it's page 19. Just I suppose we're just flagging just valuation as something for the council to look at going forward, because we were ostensibly finished at Christmas, and so we could have signed these accounts off 5 months ago, but it has taken a lot of effort. So I know you have a new valuer now. That's positive. I think it's just you as a committee being assured that those valuations aren't going to cause this level of delay when we get to the next set of financial statements. I'm going to move us down to page 25. So that really just gives you some of the detail in terms of what's changed. So the previous land and buildings valuation was 453 million, because we put through a prior period adjustment around schools of 40 million, and because those historic cost assets have now been valued in full, that takes the asset base down to 400 million. Just to reiterate, that doesn't impact on your usable reserves as a council. It's a technical adjustment for the valuations on the balance sheet. Page 32 just gives you a bit more detail on the historic cost adjustment. Again, I'm not going to take you through that, but that just highlights what's changed and why. And then finally, on page 49, there's just a few new recommendations around disclosure requirements within the accounts. I'm going to pause there, Chair. My intention now is to issue an unqualified opinion subject to the adoption of the council's accounts today. I clearly need to just go through the pension fund, report it in a moment, but I'm happy to pause and take any questions that members of the committee have.
Thanks very much, Mark. David.
yes, thank you, Chairman. I suppose my question really is to Declan. rather than to yourself, because I've been here so long, as in fact as most of the people along this side of this side of the room. Many years ago, there was a move to dispose of playing fields because of the, believe it or not, financial crisis that the county council faced. And now I can just visualize that because there is now less sport being played by schools generally, unfortunately, is there any pressure to dispose of school playing fields, bearing in mind that they are a substantial asset? Or is that just a fear that it is not real?
Declan. So at the moment, there's no kind of strategy to kind of sell playing fields for sort of, I don't know, cash as it were. Where we do tend to end up disposing of playing fields is if there's a reorganisation or sort of a closure of school, which is obviously kind of quite rare, but there is quite a lot of protection around school sites. But before we sell any, we've got to get permission from the Secretary of State, and then the first thing they do is just put a ring fence around it that only can be used for educational establishments. So even if we sold a playing field, it goes back into the benefit of education anyway. So it does tend to be, it does focus on minds. It's only on the ones that actually are genuinely not needed, as opposed to a push to get rid of anything.
Right, thanks for the question, David. So, Terry.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. You mentioned, I think, right at the start, sorry, when I was trying to find the pages, about this largely being caused by school valuations. I mean, and you mentioned that unless you're going to get rid of schools, it's not an issue. So why have we made it such an issue then? So why do we need these valuations? Why can we now just not put schools in at a nominal value, because they are worthless, effectively, unless you're going to sell the asset? So why do we waste 5 months, a lot of time and effort and money, in valuing things that I wouldn't have thought we would need to value? Or we could just put in at a nominal cost.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, Councillor. So your accounts are put together in accordance with an accounting framework that's set by SIPFA and that is IFRS compliant, which is an accounting standard, and that's a decision by the government in terms of how your account should look, and that's coordinated by FRAB, which is the overarching body. So your officers and myself have no option other than to make sure your assets are valued in that basis. Now, there is a significant debate at the moment about what that accounting framework should be and whether it's an appropriate accounting framework for local government, and the department, along with the Financial Reporting Council, are actually actively looking at that. I think there's merit to your question and to your arguments, and I think if the council has a particular view, I would encourage you to make that nationally, because there is an opportunity now to change the accounting framework so that we don't spend as much time on asset valuation. But at the moment, these are the rules and we have to comply with the rules.
Terry,
Thank you very much for that explanation. I'm slightly aware of some of this because it's all right, my brother, for his sins, is an accountant. So my question then is to Declan, is are we making those representations, and how much has we actually spent on getting valuations over the last 5 months in terms of time and money, which, you know, are drain on the council at a time of financial difficulty, that where we could use the money better elsewhere? So are we making representations? Are we doing it with fellow councils? Because I mean, I've been a council now for many years, and the biggest problem I've always found with council accounts is that if we got rid of SIPFA and we did proper accounting like any business, the world would be a happy place.
So we can, I mean, SIPFA were sort of tasked to look at sort of account simplification, but it hasn't really sort of come up with anything that's going to sort of really turn the needle. So in the past, the representation has been more through sort of society county treasurer, just because obviously kind of en masse it helps. But just picking up on Mark's point, we can certainly put something in, because the valuations just take an inordinate amount of time, and both ourselves and Grant Thornton use external firms to do it. So it does cost quite a bit of money to sort of to achieve this.
Thank you. I think it's a fair point, but as Mark said, we've got to comply with the rules as they are now. But we now have a new value, so hopefully be a bit quicker if they're needed next year and not delay the accounts by 5 months. Bill.
Thank you. It's all well and good, but this is only a snapshot of a period in time. Land prices go up and down like a yo-yo. So it might be accurate at the present time. Next week, it could be completely wrong. So it's really meaningless because it's not a fixed asset. It varies up and down. Land prices are going down at the moment. So whatever you decided, or the consultant decided when he wrote the report, is wrong today.
You're right, Bill, but effectively what we're saying is the assets are of no value in real terms unless we're going to realise them. We're never going to realise them because they are schools. But as with any public company accounts, it is a snapshot. The balance sheet is a snapshot in time, and it can change the next day. But there's no way around that. That's just life. Anyhow, I'll let the professionals answer the question.
No, that's right. By nature of a balance sheet is just a snapshot of a specific date, and that's what we audit to. I mean, I don't know whether this helps or it's going to make things worse, but when schools convert to academies, they come off a valuation anyway. So if you cross your fingers for more academy conversions, then maybe that answers everybody's sort of headaches.
Thanks for that. So have we got any other questions? No, we've not got any other questions. Right. So the recommendation is the committee is asked to note the external auditor's finding as set out in the annual report and to approve the draft letters of representation. Is that agreed? Agreed? Yep. And no against, no abstentions, so that's unanimous. The next item is the external audit plan and risk assessment for 23-24. Simone Himes, Assistant Director, will introduce that item before handing over to Eva Mutama and Grant Patterson from Grant Thornton. So welcome to Eva and Grant, and over to you, Simone.
Thank you, Chair. So this report will present the external audit plan for both the County Council and the Pension Fund for the next financial year, so 23-24. And you've got both those appendices A and B. And then Appendix C, you've got the informing the risk assessment document. And that's a process that Grant Thornton go through along with the council to make sure they understand fully that the council's internal controls and procedures, which then feeds into the external audit plan. I did just want to highlight paragraphs, I think it's 8 and 14 of the covering report before I hand over to Grant, which says that completion of the draft accounts for 23-24 and the external audit will both be slightly later than the statutory deadline, aiming for just December completion of the audit and sign off of the final accounts rather than September. That is due to the knock-on impact of the delay from 22-23, as well as the additional requirements in terms of the valuation work that we've just talked about and the increased audit requirements to do that. So we are sort of saying at the outset that we won't be achieving those statutory deadlines for 23-24, but they will only be slightly later than those deadlines. But I'm now going to hand over to Grant to go through the report in more detail.
Thank you, Simone, and thank you, Chair. Just by way of introduction, my name is Grant Patterson. I'm a Director in Public Sector for Grant Thornton in Birmingham. I am going to be the engagement lead for the pension fund. But I'm actually also standing in today for Helen Lillington, who is going to be the engagement lead for the county's audit. Helen's got to attend a funeral today, so I'm standing in. So I will be presenting the county plan, and then Eva will pick up on the pension fund plan that are in front of you. Before going into the plans, I will take you to Appendix C, first of all, which is the informing the audit risk assessment. And that's really just to inform members that this is part of the process we go through, as Simone has highlighted, where we do ask management for their views on certain areas of the accounts in terms of when we're doing our risk planning. So it underpins both plans. And what we do ask is yourselves, as I suppose those charged with governance, to say that you have read the paper and you're satisfied with management responses. We've gone through it as a joint one for both the pension fund and the county council. So first of all, before I sort of go through the plans, it's just an opportunity for you to say, well, this is we've made various choices around fraud and law and regs and the assumptions that are in the accounts, including sort of PP&E as we've gone through already. This underpins both plans, so it's your opportunity to comment upon that if you have any comments upon that before I sort of then go through the plans themselves. So that starts on page 85 of the main pack, the printed page 85 rather than the PDF, I think. Members don't have any questions, right? Okay, so if I take you then first to the County Council's audit plan, which starts on page 19 of your pack. In terms of, it does build upon what Mark has just said to you around where we see the significant risk lie. We've looked at the local context. Clearly, this is a difficult time for local government as a whole, and as we highlight on page 22, you are, as a council, have their challenges around financial sustainability that we're seeing across the sector. You've got a balanced position for this financial year, 23-24, but you are looking at deficits into 24-25, 25-26, and 26-27 that I know that management will be looking to address. And as is usual with councils that have sort of educational responsibilities and social services, your SEND budget is one of the key issues around where controlling the overall spend and income is a challenge, and again, you're not alone in that. So we're just reflecting upon that. Is sort of some of the key risks that are driving some of our thinking around the work we were doing in the accounts, and probably just identifying here that in the East Midlands you have the Freeport, the only sort of land-based Freeport I think in the country. So and we were working as auditors through that to see the implications of that. The primary focus upon our work actually in 23-24 is going to be around the loans we've made to that to the Freeport. There will be some elements that pick us up as part of our value for money work. The loans aren't material, but we will be looking at the accounting for those. And I think you've capped the amount of money that you're willing to lend to the Freeport of £4 million. So we will be looking at that for 23-24. That will flow through. Just a reminder on page 24, where we just say that our audit has market as framework as well as the accounting framework, which is IFRS based and by SIPFA. There's the NEO audit code. We are following that. The NEO currently is actually looking at the code of their code of audit practice, primarily to link into elements that might be coming through in legislation around backstop and elements like that. Take you to page 25 in terms of materiality. In terms of the way we set the materiality for the county council, we're proposing materiality is around just over £15 million this year. That benchmarks to 1.5% of your prior year operating costs. And for the way that our risk framework works, that's as high as we can go. We call your Cat 2 audit. We can't go beyond 1.5. So I suppose that does reflect that overall we have confidence in your systems and arrangements and controls. Therefore, we've set our headline materiality at the highest level that we possibly can. In terms of significant risk of the audits, if you've gone through the audit findings reports, no real change from the prior year. On the next page, page 26, management overrider controls, we've looked at that. In terms of that, this is an assumed significant risk. We've honed that down to saying we need to focus on journals. And there was an issue around in terms of the Oracle Fusion and journals being under £20,000 being automatically approved by the system. We know internal audit are doing some work on that. That will just factor into our risk assessment around journals again into this year. So again, that significant risk is continuing. On the next page as well, being a public sector, if you're in the commercial sector, then the assumption of significant risk on revenue fraud income is assumed. But we also need to consider expenditure because basically when you set your budget, you're spending public funds. So we look at expenditure from a similar way. And again, we've concluded that we can actually, from that perspective, we can rebut that assumed risk. And that follows on to the revenue side on page 28 as well. So we are rebutting, I suppose, for both income and expenditure. From us, a significant risk of material fraud. We will be doing work on both areas. Also, if it doesn't mean we don't do any audit work, it just means we won't do any specific fraud sort of focus work in that. But we will keep an eye for fraud if there are any as we go through our audit process. If I take you to page 29, you've probably again, this is where we look at the significant risk. It still remains on valuation of land and buildings. The figure in there, this was drafted before the final account, so there's a figure there for year-end value of 453 million. As you've just heard, that's now dropped to around just over 400 million as the adjustments in the accounts. But significant risk won't change, so we will be looking at property, plant and equipment again for this year in terms of as a significant risk and undertaking that work as necessary. As we've heard, you've got a new valuer, so hopefully that will smoother this year, and we'll work through that with officers as we go forward. The other significant risk in the accounts is on the next page, which is around net pension fund liability. And I'm sure members have been through that before. If you've sat on this committee, it's got a lot of assumptions in there. The numbers can move quite significantly with small changes to those assumptions. Therefore, we do consider it a significant risk of material misstatement. Therefore, we will be focusing again that as part of our audit work going forward. On the sort of pages 31 and 32, we do other risks, and if you wanted to get into sort of audit terminology, they're called Scott pluses, which is significant classes of transactions, which is an audit terminology. So we were doing some work around those, but they're not significant risks. So we will be looking at the completeness of your expenditure. Again, looking at, as I said earlier, the Freeport loan. And then particularly also you have pooled investments in a similar way that the pension fund does, but you have pooled investments and they are level 3 investments from an audit perspective, again, underpinned by a lot of assumptions. So we'll be doing some work around those, but we don't think they're of such a value that it'll be a significant risk of material misstatement. Those are the key significant risks. I wasn't necessarily going to go through our contraries. We've got a big agenda in terms of where we are on progress against recommendations, etc. They're outlined in that. We'll follow those up as part of our audit for 23-24. Going through that. In terms of materiality, I mentioned the headline materiality of 15 million. There's also, we will do a specific one when we look at specific disclosures in the financial statements around officers, not officers, but officer remuneration, and that will be £100,000, and that's outlined on page 40 of our audit plan. There are elements there about we'll be using our IT team to go through elements, and clearly the other big part of our audit is around value for money. Our planning of that is still in process. We haven't identified any significant weaknesses at this point in time, but we haven't gone through the full planning process, and Helen will bring back an updated report to you once that work has been completed to see if any significant weaknesses have been identified through that work. We do say on page 44 where you were last year, I suppose, on 22-23 in terms of financial sustainability, governance, and improving economy efficiency, effectiveness. You're all amber across that. So I suppose in the way I wouldn't expect much to change from that, but Helen will go through our detailed risk process and come back to you on that one. In terms of on page 28, which is where the audio logistics, as you've heard, I suppose you're in what we would call phase 2 of delivery. We will be looking to finish, I think the pension fund audit, as Eva will say, will probably finish slightly ahead of the main audit, but we're looking to get both audits ready to be issuing our opinion in December of this year going forward. I think just on pages 47, just to bring members up to date, we're under the first year of the new PSA contract. I'm sure as members are aware, there's a significant increase in fees. There's also a slight change in the way, I can see Councillor Balter might have a question on that, but there's also just a change in the process of when we can bill. We have to now say in complete certain stages of the audit before we can actually build various elements of those audits. That's outlined on page 47, normally linked into how much we've done planning, have we finished annual auditors report, etc. And on page 48 is the increase in fees for 23-24. There is a scale fee. There also a variation for ISA 315. I would say we'd had conversations with PSAA as part of the tendering process about whether they would incorporate that within that. They determined not to incorporate that in. They wanted us to go through a cycle. Therefore, we still are conducting that work, or that's the work we need to do. Therefore, there is a variation on top of the main fee audit variation, and that's what the market has determined of the appropriate fees. And then on pages 49 and 50, just to say that we do some non-audit service work for yourselves in terms of looking at grant claims, local transport claim, and then the teachers' pensions claim, and we disclose those elements there. I think on page 51, just for this committee, IFRS 16 comes in from 24-25. So it doesn't directly impact the 23-24 accounts, although there may well be additional disclosure requirements around the impact that you'll be expecting to see in 24-25. When we're working through that with the council, all councils will now be working through the processes for that. But basically, all leases will now come on balance sheet. They'll be called right of use assets. So there will be no operating leases coming back into the accounts. And then there's the communications trend. I won't go into that. And then finally, on page 54, I just bring to your attention, I don't think we'll be using, well, I'm sure we will not be using here, an escalation policy. As you're saying, there have been delays in the financial statements. As a firm, we devised this policy where we will communicate if there are issues with the accounts. That's highlighted on page 54. I'm hopeful, well, pretty certain that we will not be able to have to utilise that escalation policy. And there are some pages on the potential audit backlog consultation that's going through. That the government is potentially looking at the backstop. That legislation hasn't been seen yet or passed yet. But again, you're not in a position where we'd have to take that into account, but it's there for information. So that is where I stop on the county's accounts audit plan. Maybe it's happy to take questions now, and then Eva can take the pension fund.
No, if we take questions now. Thanks very much, Grant. I'm sure there will be some questions. Bill.
Yes, it's again back in history. Grant and myself had an interesting relationship in the previous authority. However, the same questions apply. This tremendous increase in the audit fee. What way can that be reduced? Can more work be done by the internal audit to present you with more facts so you don't have to do it? Because I think the internal audit would work out cheaper than the external audit. So anything we can do to improve that communication with yourselves. In the report, it notes about work being satisfactorily passed to you. And if it's not, your charge is extra. So no doubt you'll give some warning to officers that work is not what you required sooner rather than later. So I wonder if you can comment on that.
I suppose in those general terms, in terms of clearly we've been through a competitive process as part of the other firms, as part of the PSA contract. So to assert the scale fee is effectively the market price. That's what we believe we need to charge to meet the quality standards as required by auditors. And yes, we are a firm, and we do make profits. So it's meets the reasonable margins for the sector. So that's the market rate. How could it go down? I think possibly, I think I'm speaking off the top of my head to a certain extent, is if the framework changes and we have to do less work, then I'm sure that it could then the potential revisiting that, i.e., as you've alluded to, if we have to do less work on property, plant and equipment, if we have to do less work in those areas, then there may well be some sort of going back into looking at it again. Unfortunately, I cannot utilise internal audit under UK currently auditing standards. I can talk to them, I communicate, I cannot direct them, and therefore I cannot utilise their evidence as evidence for part of my audit. So unfortunately, maybe going back a number of years where we had that cooperation with internal audit, where they might have undertaken some testing and we could rely upon that. Currently, that's not something that we can do as external auditors. Therefore, unfortunately, whilst we have close discussions with them, we understand the risk environment, we look at their work, I can't place direct reliance upon it. Therefore, I cannot do that. I think in terms of the key thing for me would be under the current audit fees is working, well, I'm Helen and the team and myself and Eva in the team working closely with officers to make sure there are none of those overruns that are alluded to in here. That's the key thing for us in making sure the evidence is right first time from both sides. That's where the delays and the additional costs come in. But at the moment, there's not, unless the framework changes and the auditing requirements on us are reduced, then I can't see that there's an easy way of reducing the audit fee.
Thank you, Grant.
You just come back.
Yeah, of course you can.
That's I know you went out for tendering, but I think only 4 companies applied for that.
Yeah.
So you're very restricted what you can choose. So it's not really testing the market, is it? If only 4 companies applied.
Well, I think I can't do it. PSA was trying to encourage more companies into the market. I think you've seen sort of some of the newer it's quite a high hurdle given the audit, the FRC position in terms of the audit quality and regulation. There's quite a high barrier to get into the market. So I think that in terms of that, I know PSA was looking to widen the market. So you have seen some smaller firms come in to take up the less complex audits. Certainly in the Southwest, we've seen sort of AZETs come in as well, and people like that come into the market. So I think they are trying to make that wider audit market, but it's getting that balance between the FRC, the regulatory requirements, the accounting framework. Yes, there are some who decided not to go into the public sector market, but it's the market we are committed to the public sector. I think we still have the greatest share of the market overall. We'll make sure we deliver your quality audit.
Thank you. Thanks. It's supply and demand really as well, isn't it? It's going to impact on it. As you alluded to, there aren't that many companies who are capable of undertaking these audits. Until it gets more, the competition is going to be limited. But anyhow.
Yeah, and I'm sure if Mark's still here being the national lead. Yeah, but I mean, I think we'd also argue that some of the audit fees in the past have been maybe lower than they should have been. Because that's the way competition works to a certain extent. And I'll take it from there.
Okay, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. It's really following on from my colleague, Mr. Bolter there. Can I just ask, sorry, sir, I can't see your nameplate. Grant, hello, yeah, Grant. Yeah. I'm just asking, do you actually provide advice to the council how we can actually finesse some of these processes so we don't meet as many bumps in the road and that there are savings that could be made in this process? Is that part of the gift of what you offer?
We need to be independent, so I can't give you advice. But we certainly go through and say what we require as auditors in terms of evidence and how we might be able to work more closely with you around getting it right first time. So we do. Sorry, I mean someone's going to pick that up a little bit. So.
Only to add that there are recommendations in the annual audit letter and in the audit findings report. So where we have had issues, that the auditors are able then to make recommendations to how we can improve that the following year. But as Grant said, they're not able to provide sort of advice to the council, but they can make recommendations for improvement.
Hey, Chair, can I come back? Yeah, it's just like to our voters, it could appear something of a cash cow that if every time we have to be revisited by yourselves, we get a bill, it could come under question and scrutiny. So I'm just wondering what sort of presented it sort of precursory or to preempt those kind of issues. But thank you, Grant. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Terry, you have a question.
Thanks, Chair. Page 23, bullet point 3. I just wonder if you can just let us know if the offer has been taken up in the last 12 months by both parties. Page 25, significant risks, and I think we've already discussed this, is that you've got valuation of land and buildings, and I think we've already gone through this a little bit with Mark, where Mark actually said basically the valuation of schools is not a significant risk. So would that section not be more valuable to us as the committee looking at this if there was a split between those assets which do have a value that we own and those assets that don't have a value that we own? Because from our point of view, we get a lump figure which is irrelevant, because if it includes schools, etc., valued at whatever, it's fairly meaningless. And therefore, when it's classed as a significant risk, half of it isn't a significant risk, but you include it as a significant risk. And the same with the pension fund valuation. So there is only a significant risk for a pension fund if the company operating it is likely to go bust. Now, as a council, we can't go bust. We get pulled out by commissioners, etc. I appreciate the IFRS rules said this is how you value pension funds, which is a nonsense, which I think we all recognise. But it clearly isn't a significant risk for this council, is it? Or in what world is it a significant risk? Because we're here, pensions will be contributed, people will put in their contributions, we as a council will, irrespective of whether we're in special measures or not. So it then goes on. And then coming to the costs which have already been alluded to, I think several years ago, the valuation fees used to be included within the fee that the auditors gave us going back in the past. Then they got split out and we got I think it was about 5 years ago, we got an extra bill for valuations from the then auditors. So Why is it you as the auditors don't arrange for the valuations and expect us to do it, whereas logically it would seem to be part of your role to get you done independently? And coming back to the question I did ask Declan earlier is, how much do we spend on valuations? Because we have to add that on top of the audit fee to give us a comprehensive cost of what the audit costs us. Sorry, they're the first three. I may have more later.
Right, okay, I'll try and address them in terms of, I suppose in terms of PP&E or other land and buildings, whilst I think we need to be careful here to sort of say that they're an audit significant risk, not necessarily, I suppose, a management significant risk. So we have to look at them through the auditing standards lens, through the accounting lens, and actually all of your property, plant, and equipment that has to be valued at current value, i.e. not a historic cost, is subject to evaluation, and that is a fair vast majority of your property, your land and buildings. Therefore, for us, even if it's schools, there are assumptions within schools that drive those valuations, and therefore it is a significant risk to us. Even though I recognise as a council, you manage that risk in a different way. That the asset valuation isn't the way you manage that. It is more around, are those assets available for use, etc. And you have a number of systems that help you manage those assets in a different way. But currently, under the current, as Mark was saying, under current reporting framework, and it's IFRS, and actually this wouldn't make a difference if you're public or private sector. If you're under IFRS and the FRC, and you would expect us to audit to those standards. So even though I know someone said earlier, if we moved into company accounts, you'd still be in the same ball game. To be honest, the company accounts will still have to do this, and actually probably in the commercial sector, they're probably even more important because a lot of those are underpinning borrowing. Yours don't underpin your borrowing anyway. So it is the factor there. It's a risk for us. There are assumptions in all of those. There's only a sort of small portion where you're actually a historic cost. Infrastructure used to be a historic cost. That is a big chunk. But then we had those infrastructure issues as well. And interestingly, I think the Treasury has now gone through a thematic review where it's looking at valuations. So it is quite a complex area, which is why it's important probably Declan and Simone about getting those consultation responses in to government. So I can't take that away. That is going to be a significant risk in terms of the audit. Also, in terms of the accounts, I suppose it's a true and fair view on the financial statements. Hence, you have to value your assets. So you can't just put them in a historic cost. It's a true and fair view under that accounting standard, which what drives our audit work. And I think I've forgotten the third one. So, the chief exec. I honestly, in terms of chief exec, I honestly don't know at the moment. Whether Helen has reached out to chief exec. Probably, I'll be honest, as a pension fund auditor, the chief exec is well, I wouldn't necessarily need to speak to chief exec as a pension fund auditor specifically. I'd have to ask Helen whether that invite's gone out or it's an offer there. We normally like to meet chief exec once a year, but normally through the value for money work, you get to see the chief executive. So, but it will be and there's also options to do private meetings with yourselves as well.
Just to reinforce what Grant says, that normally do meet John as part of the sort of value for money review. Now, where that now that so that I can answer that one. So yeah, we do have a quarterly meetings. So we go through sort of like, you know, what's going well, what's not going so well, with sort of things like the audit, sort of wider sort of sector stuff. So the quarterly things with myself definitely happen. With John, whether it's once or twice a year. The thing I was just going to stress on this as well, that the committee has got an entitlement. If you ever want to meet kind of the external auditors without officers present, the committee has got that right to request that as well. And it's obviously an important part of governance that you are aware that you can do that.
Thanks very much. Terry.
I also asked about the valuation fees.
Unless Simone or Nick knows, we'd have to get back to you on it, but it's, yeah.
So I'd have to say that, I mean, I'm not sure they ever will build in. I think there's two issues here. As auditors, because you use your experts, I mean, and I think this is another debate. We have to get, sometimes if it gets really complex, we get our own expert to say, is your expert? I'm not a valuer. So I understand valuations broadly, but there might be specific areas. So that's where the additional fee in the past you'd have seen in some of our audit reports would have been us employing an independent valuer to make sure we ask the right questions of your valuer. Maybe slightly different. I don't think we've never employed valuers for you, if you know what I mean. I don't think it's auditors.
Okay, Terry.
And I also asked a question about why is the pension fund a significant risk when a pension fund on an ongoing basis can never be a significant risk.
Okay, in terms of sorry, I'll answer. There's two things. There's the county's perspective where the net pension liability sits on the balance sheet, And you're quite right that the fundamental underpinning of that one is more around the valuation of the fund as a whole, where the council sits in, and what impact it has on contributions, because that's the one that drives your budget setting. So in terms of that, yes, you do look at that in terms of what the contributions are and how the fund is performing. Pension fund plan's coming, but in terms of that, again, the pension fund accounts are a true and fair view, and the pension fund accounts, and basically the biggest on if you look at the asset statement, is the valuation of the assets within there. LGPS is slightly different from commercial schemes in the sense of you very rarely see liabilities on the pension fund balance sheet. It is normally just the asset statement. But again, we need to make sure that the net or the investment asset valuations that you put in the pension fund are true and fair representations. Hence, that's why it becomes when you get to pension fund at level 3. But the pension liability is in there because it is, I suppose, in a way, well, it's a much smaller number on your balance sheet right now because of the way the market's worked in the last couple of years. But it can be potentially a very big net, and the assets and liabilities, it doesn't take much to move them by, well, materiality of £15 million. So it's again an accounting issue. It wouldn't necessarily drive the revenue impact. I accept that. But when I'm giving a true and fair opinion on, or if Helen's giving a true and fair opinion on your financial statements, we have to go to the accounting standards, and we have to make sure that you have done a true and fair representation of the net pension liability. On the pension fund, we also have the level 3 investments as well, that we just need to make sure that they have been valued reasonably in their true and fair basis, and they are quite complex because some of them don't have measurable market value that you can actually get to, and therefore someone's making an estimate.
Okay, thanks very much, Grant. Now, have we got any other questions at the moment before I hand over to Eva? We haven't. So, Eva, thank you for waiting patiently. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to go through the pension fund, and much of the things have also been covered for the county. I guess the key matters, that is page 60, is just to bring to your attention the triennial valuations that happened in 23 and the effect that it had, as well as the upcoming legislation that is there regards the transfer of assets and them being pooled. It's just for your information, but we do take this as auditors into consideration. I will move on to the significant risks, which is page 66 to 67. Similarly to the county, because the pension fund also uses Oracle, management override of controls, which is the testing of journals, will be something that we look at at the pension fund. And then the valuation of level 3 investments, mainly these are the pooled investments and private equity held by the pension fund, as well as the valuation of the directly held property. We have rebutted the revenue and expenditure, though it's prescribed, but we've rebutted that based on the controls that are within the county and the pension fund. Moving on, I will discuss materiality. Materiality that has been set for the current year, that is page 73 years. Page 73 is 69 million. It's similar to what was set in the prior year. It's just based on 1.2% of the gross investments as at 31 March 2023. This will be reassessed when the 31 March 2024 accounts are published. Regards the prior year recommendations, 2 of the recommendations have not been corrected. We will reassess these. These were in regards with general controls, as well as some information missing from investment managers or fund managers. So to come back on materiality, the materiality set for the financial statements is 69 million. And we've determined a lower materiality for the fund account, which is looking at benefits, contributions, and that has been set at 25 million. It's similar to what we had last year. It equates to 10% of the prior year gross expenditure. IT strategy is similar. We're going to look at Oracle Fusion using our team, as well as Altair for the member data side of things. Our internal experts will assist us in looking at the ITGCs. Then regards audit logistics, our audit is going to start fairly earlier than that of the county. It's going to start the 31st of July up to the 13th of September, but we hope to issue our audit findings and also sign the report in December 2024. Regards the fees have gone slightly up from, I think it was 57 for 23 to 96,000 for the period under review. I think one thing that has sort of changed is the IS-19 letters, which we would issue to other auditing bodies. Prior were a separate charge. Now it's inclusive into the scale fee. There are no other non-audit related services that are going to be given to the pension fund audit. I guess the other is just our communication to yourselves, as well as escalation and backstop, which things I don't think will relate to presently regards the pension fund. I don't know if there are any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephen. So, Derek.
I didn't put my hand up, but I'll ask a question anyway.
Apologies, I thought you had put your hand up. I assumed.
It's only a quickie from an audit perspective. I mean, clearly we have a pensions fund committee here or whatever, and to look at it regularly and look at the investments, etc. Now, there is a move afoot. I mean, councillors become under increasing pressure all the time, and I might probably get one email a week at least about our ethical investment decisions for pension funds. Now, I come at this from the other way around. The pension fund there is to ensure that pensioners get a pension. Now, one would like to be as ethical as possible, but without delving into a lot of the investments, you're never going to truly know whether they're ethical or not. But is there a risk, and how would you report that risk to us as auditors if you felt that undue pressure was being put to change investment decisions dressed on the basis of who we should invest with rather than looking after the pensioners who live off the investments? So I wasn't quite sure in this how that dichotomy is covered in the audit work you do. So would you put a comment saying your investment decisions seem to be producing lower returns because you're following an investment decision this way, as opposed to what we might be able to earn investing elsewhere? So I'm not just commenting on who we're investing with, it's just that procedure of, do we get it alerted to us if investment returns are going down because of the policy decisions being made?
I think in that sense, it's more taking it back to what a general role of the auditor is when it comes to policy. It's not auditors to comment directly upon policy. Your elected members, and that's your decision making around where you wish to take that. I think we would look at it around governance. In terms of, you're quite right, you have a pensions committee and they might have as a subcommittee investments. Is the appropriate governance in place? It's not for me to second guess what is right and what is a good decision and a bad decision. I mean, hindsight is a wonderful thing, and auditors generally, I mean, that's easy for us to say because we don't generally look afterwards. So I think we're looking more from the governance arrangements. So do you have appropriate governance arrangements in place? I know in SLGPS, you're not a trustee board, but the pension committee acts as a de facto trustee board. They should act in the best interest of members. So that debate is much wider now than just best returns. It also includes ESG. I would say as a fund, you are also be moving towards more transparent reporting around where you invest. And there's a drive from government that will coming through at some point around what disclosures they expect pension funds to make in their annual reports, etc. So we wouldn't directly comment upon that. I think if we had concerns around the governance of that decision making, we would flag that through our reporting. It's not for us to say exactly where, as you're saying, which investments are right or particularly wrong for your fund.
Declan.
Just to add to that, in terms of this sort of governance of the pension fund, there is also a pension board, and their role is to look at the governance, make sure those governance arrangements are in place. I've also got the designation of the responsible officer of the pension fund, so in theory it's down to me as well to be sort of shouting up with it if we're not following that fiduciary duty. So there are a few safeguards in there.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think the sort of paramount duty of the pension fund is it takes precedence, you know, the returns and being able to pay the pension takes precedence over all of the considerations. So, you know, obviously we are going to take account of ethical investments and climate change and everything else, but there is very much a duty for them to make sure we can pay the pensions, but not ignore. I mean, we have climate change strategy, but yeah, it's a good. I take your point, Terry. Have we got? Yeah, Mr. Will.
Point. I think obviously there's been an ongoing debate within the pension committee on this issue, and what we're picking up, I think, is a mood amongst national pension advisors that we have to take account of the fact that there are significant risks involved in overdependence on fossil fuels in the interest of our pensioners. We received numerous reports, don't we, on that board from advisors, and we don't take any. No decisions are taken without advice, which seems to come to us in droves. What should happen? In fact, Terry thinks we should double the number of meetings we have because there's so much information. Quite honestly, it is difficult to assimilate all the information we do receive. It's almost overwhelming, but we do our best.
Yeah, I think we get good advice on the pension committee, and there's obviously increasing pressure on. Will certain companies become stranded assets with no value, and all of that is taken into account, and it is quite complex, but we do have good advisors who LGPS Central do very much focus on climate change and all this sort of thing, and do give us good advice. It is complex, and yeah, there's a lot to take in. Anyhow, we won't get diverted. Have we got any other questions for Eva? Bill?
Usual comment, Chair, that the audit fee has gone from 57,000 to 96. Not a small increase, a dramatic increase. Have your standards changed as well? So you've got to do more reporting and more checking to accommodate this large amount of increase?
I mean, again, it's been through the PSA contract tendering. I would probably have said that the pension fund fees in the prior contract were lower than they should have been. If you looked across the commercial sector, then I think the pension fund fee now is in the same area where it's probably even still on the low side. If you looked at the commercial occupational pension schemes of similar size, similar complexity. And as Eva said, it does now include non-audit services that were charged separately in the past. So it's basically the same effectively. If you look at it, I suppose it's getting close to 150% to doubling, which is similar to the thing, because the auditing standards are still there. But I think I would have said that the previous fees were probably a little bit lower than they should have been under the previous contract, but that's what we signed up for. Therefore, we delivered against those fees as best we could. With appropriate variations, so it's now just reflecting what we believe we need, the work we need to do on the pension fund. So,
okay. Somewhere in the report, I just can't find it now. It mentions that using the internal audit to give you some facts and figures as well. So on one hand, previous report you said you couldn't use internal audit, and this one you're saying you're using internal audit. So I just wondered how this comes
I think
about.
on that one, if it's the right element, I think we said we'd use internal auditors to work on journals, and we would. I think they're doing some work on looking at the journal under £20,000 that auto approved. So we would look at that work to see how that will then affect our risk assessment for when we tested journals.
So, Terry, you have a question on Appendix C.
One shouldn't read these reports in the early hours of the morning, so apologies for this one, Grant. If it's, I was reading page 109, going concern, and I was slightly alarmed at paragraphs 2 and 3, which basically, if I've read it correctly, say, because we're a local council, because we're a government body and we can't go bust, given an opinion on a going concern basis. Now, to me, a going concern basis for a council is, would we have to issue a section 114 notice? Is this presumably why then that all councils who've gone bust, who've issued a 114, have been audited and nothing's been raised? In which point it begs into question what the point of the audit is.
Right, okay. I won't come on the last comment. In terms of public sector and going concern, there has been a change in terms of over the last I think 2 or 3 years now, in terms of the presumption, certainly for those members who are certainly more in the commercial world, where you look at going concern and you look at cash flows and it's all generated by, have you got enough cash to keep yourself going? It's now looking at service continuation in the public sector. So picking up on the councillor's point is, if the council ceased to operate, what would happen to its services? Well, its services would continue. They would probably normally be picked up by some other body. Therefore, you start from that presumption of service continuation. And that's why under going concern, and where you see those that have issued section 114 notices, you may well not get auditors qualifying their opinions on a going concern basis. However, you do need to look at it as an auditor. It's still there as going concern. Like there might be material uncertainties and elements like that we need to draw attention to, and you will put it into your financial statement. So the presumption, what it means is we don't generally do as much work. We still look at cash flows, but we don't. In the past, I'm sure that Declan would come along and say, can you please give us a detailed cash flow analysis looking 18, 20 months out that we could look at. We still ask for those cash flows, but they're not now underpinning our work. There's a lot more detail if you're in a commercial work around underlooking some of those cash flow elements. It's service presumption is where we look at. Therefore, we take a sort of, I suppose, a reduced risk approach to going concern. It's not to say we don't look at going concern. Your value for money report, we'll look at that, and that's why we look at financial sustainability generally, and we make comments there around. I mean, clearly, as we've put in the plan, the medium-term financial strategy, you put a break-even position for 2024. You are showing deficits now for the next 3 years. Apologies if I'm not quite up to speed on that and exactly where you are as a council, but that would factor into considerations. But just because you are showing that would not mean we would report that you are not a going concern. So it's more to do with the framework we operate in. But we do look at it and we will report if we feel that there is an issue.
Okay, thank you, Grant. Thank you, Eva. Has anybody got any other questions? No? Okay, so moving to recommendations on page 17. Let's just so we are asked, can I say the author is noting that all comments made will be captured in the minutes as the usual way. Is that all right with everybody? Everybody agreed? Agreed. That's everybody. Right. So moving on to item number 11, East Midlands Shared Services, internal audit work undertaken by Nottingham City Council. Just before we do move on, thank you, Grant, for your questions, and thank you for your presentation, Eva. I think you've had some fairly testing questions, and the reality is you've got to comply with SIPFA. But thank you very much for your attendance and answering all the questions. So,
yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll probably just hang around for a little bit. Eva, maybe I'll leave, but I'll send around for it. I've got.
Lovely. Okay. So Neil Jones, Head of County Council's Internal Audit, will introduce this item, and we have John Slater from Group Assurance and Audit Governance Manager at Nottingham City Council joining us online to take us through the report. So welcome, John, and Neil, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very brief introduction from me really on this. So Nottingham City Council and the County Council Leicestershire share an IT system. From that we jointly deliver HR, administration, payroll and finance transactional services in the organisation known as East Midlands Shared Service. Nottingham City Council Internal Audit is a designated audit provider for EMS. Audit reports are passed to me. I get the opportunity to raise questions directly with Nottingham City or the head of EMS. And at the end of each year, the head of audit at Nottingham City produces an annual report, which includes an opinion on the overall adequacy and effectiveness of EMS control environment. So John Slater, who is the Group Assurance and Audit Governance Manager, will now present the report for 22-23, progress on 23-24 audits and plans for 24-25. Thank you, Chair.
Good morning. So internal audit at Nottingham City provides the service for East Midlands Shared Services. I'm presenting the delayed audit outturn and head of audit opinion for 2022-23. So we have 4 audits covering core financial and systems activities, and the outcomes worsened in 22-23 compared to 21-22 overall, with accounts receivable falling from significant to moderate assurance and system admin and controls deteriorating to limited assurance, whilst accounts payable improved to significant assurance. There's some more detail in the report, but on the basis of that work, the head of audit provided limited overall assurance on EMSS internal controls for 22-23 on his return from absence. It's worth noting that we're expecting an improvement in the individual levels of assurance 22-23 and probably the overall level of assurance, with 2 audits finalised so far and fieldwork being evaluated in the other 2. Going forward, it will be important to ensure that your new head of East Midlands Shared Services takes account of business continuity controls in the initial few months, as your current head has been one of the key areas of control for business continuity. Our internal audit resources are severely limited at Nottingham City Council compared to previous years, although reducing for some time. It's got significantly worse in the last few months, and this has meant we can only plan for 24-25 and EMS audits on a follow-up basis. That's what we can support with current Nottingham City Council resource and structure, and we have similar measures at Nottingham City Council. Whilst this may be a workable arrangement for a short term, it's not suitable for a longer term. We've raised the issue of resourcing internal audit several times at Nottingham City Council Internal Audit Committee, with the CFO present and directly with the CFO. However, since 21-22, our staffing levels have fallen from 11.05 FTEs to 6.29 FTEs from June of this year, and our salaries are not locally competitive for local government internal audit, which has been clear from the response rate. On one occasion, we've been permitted to recruit during that period. I'm currently looking at points in Principles 7 and 8 of the new Global Internal Audit Standards, which map to points 1100 and 1110 of the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards, to formally report to the City Council on that issue. Right, so I'm prepared to take questions if there are any.
Thank you. Thanks very much, John. Has anybody got any? Well, I can't imagine they haven't got any questions. Bill.
It's rather worrying, Chair, isn't it? Picking my words carefully. Is our head of internal audit happy with the staff resources he's got for his section, or has he got a similar problem?
We're doing fairly well. We've managed to maintain the team at the staffing levels for over a year and a half now. Fortunately, we had one person leave in February. We will be making plans to replace that person.
Okay, that's my annual question, Chair, to the head of internal audit.
Of course it is, and
no doubt officers are working with Nottingham City on an alternative plan for their internal audit, so we are satisfied we've got right advice and right checks and balances.
Okay, thanks, Bill. I just Simone, you wanted to say something.
Thank you. It was just to clarify, really, that although Nottingham City have set that plan out in terms of what resources they have for 24-25, that has been to the EMS Joint Committee a couple of months ago, and the committee has said that they're not happy with that plan and has asked for some more options to come forward with some different resource options. That is coming back to Joint Committee in June for us to consider that further. So just wanted to clarify that we have asked for other options, certainly in terms of 24-25, and beyond then, from 25-26 onwards, we will need to think about how we go forward in a more acceptable way. We're still having some discussions on that.
Thank you, Simone. That's reassuring. Declan, did you want to say anything?
It pretty much overlaps what Simone said, just for beyond 24-25. Like I say, we were made aware by Nottingham Section 151 officer last week that they didn't feel able to resource the sort of the internal audit beyond this current financial year. So we'll look at other options, which could be outsourced, it could be LCC internal audit doing it, but we'll just have to work those through.
Okay, thank you. Gordon, yeah.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's quite interesting. I mean, we have a huge pack. We have a huge pack here, you know, over 400 documents, which no doubt we'll perhaps talk about later. We've got a very, very serious situation here with very minimal documentation on, but obviously appreciate, you know, the comments that were made, and certainly appreciate the comments that Simone and Declan have made. I would just really reiterate the point that this does not appear as satisfactory in any way, shape or form. And I think Simone and Declan have covered some issues, but what was interesting to me is we've got the facts set out here. What are the implications around this? And where does this take us in the future around assurance? Because a lot of this is no assurance whatsoever in any way, shape or form.
I just reiterate, it clearly isn't satisfactory, and the implications are that if we're not going to get a clean audit, well, we need alternative arrangements, and I think Declan and Simone have indicated that. But no, there's no way that it is satisfactory, and I think John has alluded to that, and he's taken it to Nottingham City Council. That something will have to be, you know, outsourcing, whatever, but we can't go on like this. All right, so has anybody else got any other question? Terry.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, John, and we recognise the difficulties you've got there, and thanks for being totally upfront and honest with us. From our perspective, I look at this from another way, that these are significant services to our staff, particularly payroll, etc., and a service which contains a lot of private information on staff as well. So assurance that the service is running effectively with corporate governance, I think, is key to all of us. So I'm slightly concerned. We've known about this for a while. We're looking at a meeting in June to look at next year, but that doesn't resolve the problem of the previous years. Now, presumably, we've got a signed agreement between us and Nottingham City Council. I cannot believe, well, I hope not, there's no provision within that agreement for what action we should take. And I would have thought we should be taking urgent action rather than waiting for yet another meeting in June when the situation could get worse. So I suppose what I'm asking is, What are we doing here and now to get on top of this rather than just let it drift on to further meetings? I mean, if it keeps on going to each committee here and nobody's making the decision, where are we? And goodness me, hope we won't get a data breach or anything, but we won't know because we're not doing internal audit reports. Where does that leave us, particularly in relation to the risk to our staff? We've seen the recent one, haven't we, with the armed forces? I mean, you know, we wouldn't want anything of that nature happening. So what can we do now? What are we doing now? Because I do think we do need to take control of this in some way, shape or form, and assist John in whatever way we can.
We have had a number of discussions with senior colleagues at Nottingham, and the original plan was brought to joint committee, I think it was the beginning of March. The committee hasn't approved the audit plan for 24-25, hence why we've asked for it to go back to the committee in June to set out some different options that hopefully will be more acceptable, certainly to resolve the 24-25 issues. But we have escalated it internally where we can. You know, and the joint committee may decide to do that at the next, to do something further at the next meeting as well when the plan comes back if it's still not acceptable.
Thank you, Simone. I think the points that Mr. Richardson makes are valid. If there is no effective internal audit taking place, but I mean, we do have a plan and it will be picked up. Declan.
Just to add, hopefully to give a bit more comfort, although internal audit's important, but it's not the only sort of line of defence, as it were. So Grantham obviously do quite a bit of stuff sort of independently from internal audit anyway. So they do a review of sort of the IT security, etc. There's that layer of assurance, and EMS obviously independently. They're not, I suppose, just waiting for internal audit to come on. So they do employ sort of Oracle or other consultants to do sort of health checks on the security of the system. So to just give you that bit of assurance, even if internal audit's not taking place, there is still quite a few levels of safeguards for key areas like that.
Okay, thank you, Declan. David.
This is one of those rare occasions where a situation has been flagged up, which is of concern. I mean, most of the work of this committee, if you like, is sort of receiving messages of assurance that all is well, and we just approve everything. But on this occasion, there's something seriously wrong. I think really a report should go from ourselves to Cabinet for action along the lines that Terry has suggested. That we can't just let this situation drift. I think it also illustrates really to me that that when a problem occurs in a neighbouring authority, it's not good enough for us to simply say, oh well, we're a tight ship and everything is fine. When something seriously starts to go wrong with a neighbouring authority with whom we've got close links, then it does impact. It does impact on ourselves as well as everybody else. There is a serious problem with local government funding, which has to be tackled by somebody. There's no sign really that it's coming out of any. I mean, you see these national manifestos, but I can't see anybody from any party actually saying that the crisis in local delivery of local services by local government is going to be addressed. I think that this is a good illustration that something really has to be done and taken seriously by those who seek to govern us.
Yeah, I think it is being taken seriously, and I think some of the comments that Simone and Declan have made give us some reassurance, and it's not going to be left dry. And perhaps we could come back and just get an update at some stage. Declan.
I just sort of supposed to Mr. Bill's point, wonder whether it's worth sort of the chair writing to sort of the chair of sort of the equivalents at Nottingham City to sort of raise the concerns that have been brought through this meeting, so we can draft something on that.
I think that's a very good idea. We'll do that. I propose we do that. The points you make, David, are valid. Clearly, the situation in Nottingham City Council is unusual. But nevertheless, we have to address it. We can't just sidestep it. And I think Gordon's made the same point. And John, did you want to say anything else? I mean, you've been honest and open with us, and it's up to us now to take action.
Yes, just in relation to the Oracle health checks that Declan mentioned a short while ago, that there is an open recommendation in relation to Oracle health checks, and although there's an intention expressed by EMSS to have those regularly, that hasn't yet been implemented into a regular arrangement. So although we do expect that should happen, so it's just to let you know that's also a concern of ours.
Okay, I think the points that Declan made are right. We can't just ignore the fact that the internal audit isn't being properly committed, and we'll take that. We'll write to Nottingham City Council. Bill.
Can I suggest we have a report to the next meeting of this committee of what's happened?
Yeah.
To concentrate people's minds. If you want anything in the meantime, you perhaps let us know. We could perhaps convene to have a special meeting if we need to make any decision.
Yeah.
In the meantime,
certainly. I mean, I think a report back to the committee about what actually is going on at the next meeting is a good idea. We'll write to the chair of the Nottingham, and we will note this report, but we're not going to let it go. And thank you for your comments, and thank you, John, for your honesty. And I'll just say, if there are no other questions, I think we know where we are, we know what's going on, we know the reason why it is going on, and it is resource allocation. It's good that we've ignored it. So the committee is asked to note this report on the basis that we get a report back, and also that we write to the equivalent in Nottingham City Council and express our concerns, and we need some action, and we will. And report it to Cabinet. There's no reason why we shouldn't report it to Cabinet, is there?
Not an executive function. I think it's a regulatory function, so stay within the remit of this committee.
Okay, so it's up to us basically to make sure that action is taken, and we will do. So it's down to us. So the committee is asked to note this report with the provisos that we've made of coming back here with an update, and also with me writing to the Nottingham City Council to express our concerns. But ultimately, we need to do something to put it right, and I think it's in train to do that. So is everybody happy to note the report on that basis? Okay, that's agreed then. Sorry. We've been going for an hour and a half. We'll have a 5-minute comfort break. So if you could be back here at 11:30, and then we'll press on. Thank you, John. And we'll now have a break.
Thank you.
Back and we'll press on because we still have quite a few agenda items to go through. So the next item is the risk management update. Neil Jones is going to introduce the report, and we're also joined by Jane Moore, Director of Children and Family Services, and Lindsay Kirby, High Needs Block Strategic Lead, who will provide us with a presentation on corporate risk 7.7 relating to SEND services. So we're going to start with the presentation. So over to you, Jane and Lindsay. And thanks for attending.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. So I'm going to take you through a few slides that just sets out some of the information relating to risk 7.7. And just by way of reminder, the risk is around the demand for education, health and care plans, the capacity within the department to undertake the assessments and the reviews, and also a concern around the specialist placements for those children with education, health and care needs as well. So just in terms of numbers, we have been seeing over the last few years a significant increase in the numbers of young people, children and young people who have an education, health and care plan. And you can see here, we are the dark green line at the top there. So you can see in Leicestershire, our increase in education, health and care plans is pretty much in line with that we're seeing nationally. We've currently got around about 6,228 education, health and care plans. This data just takes us to the end of 2023, but actually our numbers are pretty much in line with what's going on elsewhere. It's pretty much coming from an increase in requests for education, health and care plans. So there are more people or more children who are requesting a plan. And you can see that for Leicestershire, our increase has pretty much stayed in line with everywhere else, but it was a bit more pronounced early back in 2015. Just in terms of a bit more of a breakdown into the numbers, we are continuing to see an average increase in the number of requests for education, health and care plans that are coming in each month. So the first graph with the purple line on it shows you how many requests we're getting each month for children who are seeking an education, health and care plan. And you can see that that's going up and continuing to go up. The requests for education, health and care plans come from parents directly, but they also come from schools. The majority come from schools, and they're for children whose needs can't be met within mainstream without additional support. So the request comes into the department for a needs assessment to be undertaken, and that needs assessment essentially looks at the needs of the child and therefore what they need in order to support them within their education. We've seen and continue to see an increase in the numbers of requests coming through. Nationally, again, it's reflective of what's going on in Leicestershire. So you can see that there's been a kind of 23% increase over the last couple of years. Nationally, we're seeing about a 22% increase across Leicestershire. Really crucially, and this is where the risk has come in really, we are expected to complete our education, health and care plan assessments within 20 weeks. So from the point at which a request is made to the point at which a plan is issued, it should be 20 weeks. And you can see from the grey line on this graph that we are by no means, we're well away from the 20 weeks, and we're actually averaging around about 42, 43 weeks to complete an assessment. That's primarily, and I'll come on in a bit more detail, to one of the middle sections of it where we need to seek advice or education information from educational psychologists, but I'll come on. So the majority of the complaints that come in to the SEND service relate to the fact that we are just not able to undertake those assessments within a timely fashion. It's a national issue, so there are not many organised local authorities nationally that are able to complete those assessments within 20 weeks. But in Leicestershire, you can see that we only managed to complete about 3.8% of those that come in within that 20-week time frame. So one part of the assessment process is around advice. So we have to go out and we have to get information from a range of professionals. And one of the professionals that is specified within the Code of Practice is educational psychologists. And it's the timeliness on the educational psychology advice that is causing us the most difficulties in meeting our 20-week deadline. And again, you can see here, the blue line is our target. That's where we ought to be hitting in terms of getting our educational advice back. So about 6 weeks in the process ought to be enough time to undertake that advice. But you can see it's taking well over that through the grey blocks. It's primarily as a result of the availability of educational psychologists. So nationally, there is a shortage of educational psychologists, which means that it's very difficult to get people to undertake that advice, essentially. And the code says that you've got to have an educational psychologist to undertake that advice. So in order for us to do the assessments robustly and properly and within the statute, we need to get an educational psychologist to do that advice. Within Leicestershire, we do have an educational psychology service. We have about 8 vacancies within that service, and we are constantly trying to recruit to those vacancies. And we also have procured a number of locum EPs, so we privately buy EPs in to undertake the assessment. And we've been doing that now for about 2 years, but it still isn't giving us enough educational psychology capacity in order for us to bring that advice back into 6 weeks. And that's why we're not meeting the 20-week deadline. And again, with the annual reviews, which is part of the risk that we were concerned about, and this is a capacity issue within the department for SEND case managers to undertake the annual reviews. So we've currently got about 6,600 education, health and care plans open, and the requirement is that they are reviewed on an annual basis. So that means that we need to throughput 6,600 EHCPs through the department in order to review them, to make sure that they are still relevant for the child, that it still sets out their needs and that the provision is right. And you can see that over the last 12 months, we're averaging to achieve about 51% of those annual reviews. And that's a staffing capacity matter. So it's about having enough people essentially within the service that are able to review those plans. We are doing a lot of work to look at increasing this. So as well as looking at increasing the number of staff, actually there are smarter ways that we could do this by looking at different ways of undertaking reviews. So we're doing a lot of work through the Transforming SEND and Inclusion programme to look at how we can do these reviews more speedily. And we do make sure we prioritise reviews for those children that are transitioning between school years or have more acute concerns. But as you can see from this information, we're still not able to complete all of the annual reviews within the 12-month time that is required. And then finally, one of the areas of risk is that once we've undertaken the annual reviews, the educational health and care plan assessment of children, for those where they cannot have their needs met within mainstream education, we need to look for a specialist placement for them. So that's a placement that isn't a mainstream school. It could be one of our special schools. It could be a unit attached to a mainstream school, or it may be one of the independent provisions that operates in Leicestershire. So the majority of our children with an educational health and care plan do attend mainstream schools, and many of them have a package of support around them. But there are some children who need specialist provision, and there is still a sufficiency challenge around having enough specialist placements for those children who require provision. So there are some children, about 200, just over 200 children who've been identified that they need a specialist placement. That number changes day by day because we often then find a placement or we're looking for a placement. So we know that at any one time, as a result of their needs assessment, there are children who require a different placement. Most of those children are in mainstream school. We just need to find a different placement to meet their needs. And we still have a challenge around the number of places available for those children. And as I've put on the presentation, we do continue to open new specialist provisions. We've got a special school opening in September, and we're continuing to open units and expand some of our provision as well to make sure that we have the right provision for children within the system as well. Just a little bit on the actions around timeliness. It's a key challenge for the department, both in terms of impact for children, in terms of waiting a long time, but also that we are subject to an accelerated progress plan from the DFE as a result of us not meeting our requirements around timeliness. So we've had the Transforming Send and Inclusion programme for some time now, and it's bringing together a range of initiatives that are targeting improved timeliness and quality across the assessment process. We have recruited some additional case managers to support parents in making good choices around provision for their children. We've restructured our SENA service, so we've got people working in a dedicated way around assessment, around reviews and placements, and that's starting to see some real progress around pace within that section, as well as getting through assessments and certainly placing children. As I mentioned earlier, we have recruited additional educational psychology staff in order to undertake more assessments. It's allowing us to undertake assessments, but it's not giving us enough capacity to be able to move ourselves back into timescale. And that's just because there aren't many educational psychologists available across the country. But we are looking, as I said, around different ways of undertaking reviews that mean that we can get through them in a more timely fashion for children as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. Jane, has anybody got any queries or questions? Gordon.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation, Jane. I work with a whole range of schools. In my business, I deal with educational governance. So obviously, from that position, I do see what the impact are on schools. I'll say thanks very much for the outline there, and for articulating what the problems were around it. Just picking up one or 2 points. I mean, I was very pleased to hear what you were saying about best practice, through the TSIL programme, and also what you're actually doing around the EdPsychs, etc. Can you sort of quantify in numbers how many specialist placements you've actually got at the moment? You were saying about a new special school coming on line, and you've got specialist placements within other schools. How many of those have you got, and what would that roughly be as a percentage of what the need is around that? And then just on that point, just whether there's any plans further on for additional special placements. And just running back in terms of the EdPsychs, the educational psychologists, how many do you feel you're actually short on that? And again, as you stated, I'm aware from my dealings with schools about bringing in outside people to do that, and of course, obviously that comes with costs around that. So I'm just trying to get a bit of a feel for what you felt the optimum position would be in order to get back to the 20 weeks, and in terms of that, both in terms of staff within SENA and EdPsychs, what would almost be your ideal scenario? And then, if there could be sort of costs put on that. And I'm assuming that in terms of the work you've done, that is sort of being flagged up, to the executive in terms of this is what we actually require to hit a stable scenario. And I do take your point as well, as you were saying about being a national problem. A number of the schools I've worked with, have been talking to their local MPs about this, and I know local MPs have been talking to yourself about it, and to the chief exec around it. So I do appreciate the national picture, but in terms of the actual county, I mean, you flagged up the demand across the East Midlands. Some of the schools I work with are pretty close down towards Warwickshire, and their indication appears to be that Warwickshire seem to be in a lot better position than Leicestershire around that. So the slide at the start actually showed what the, if you like, what the position was in terms of input into those counties around the East Midlands. Have you got sort of corresponding outputs, if you like, so you could actually benchmark what Leicestershire is doing against the others? So I'm sorry, there's a whole whole range of questions in there, Jane, but thanks very much for that.
Thank you. So just in terms of specialist placements already in the system, we've got around about 1,600 children who are kind of in what we would class as sort of specialist provision. And that's broken down into places at special schools, unit provision. We do still buy about 400 places from independent providers as well. And that gives quite a good indication of the number of places we may well need, because we wouldn't ordinarily choose to buy from independent providers other than if they are the only provision that can meet need. But often we're placing in independent provision because there isn't other place elsewhere. Over the last 4 years, we have put around about 550 new places in the system, and that includes a number of new special schools, and we've got a new special school opening in September, and there'll be about 80 places in that school as well. So we have put a number of quite a large amount of new places in the system, and that's capital provision both from the local authority but also through some allocation from DFE as well. In terms of percentage need, we're continuing to work on that in order to really understand what are the needs of the children coming through the system and where can their needs best be met, and actually making sure that where we've got children within specialist provision, they are the right children in specialist provision as well. So we are continuing to invest and our capital funding in building new provision. The challenge is making sure we get it not just in the right area but meeting the right need as well. So some of it involves the special school that opens in September, but we've got another special school coming on train in a couple of years as well, again in the north of the county, but for children with autism and communication challenges. In terms of EP shortage, I think there's two things really. One is that in order for us to get through the number of assessments that we need to get through, we probably need about 50 or 60 educational psychologists to do the assessments we need. That's never going to be a feasible position. There aren't 50 psychologists waiting to come and work for Leicestershire, nor are there, and it's a challenge that's happening nationally as well. So we've currently got about 8 vacancies within the service. We are continuously recruiting for those vacancies, but it's a real challenge to get people to come and work within a local authority, but it's part of the national shortage as well. In terms of capacity, we have done some projections around what kind of capacity we would need in order to undertake our assessments and undertake our reviews within the department, and it would probably cost about another 1.2 million. But actually, you know, in this financial climate, there isn't £1.2 million in order to grow the department to meet that demand. So we're going to have to look really carefully at other ways of doing it in a more efficient way. Part of the programme of work we've been doing through Transforming Centred Inclusion is looking at how we can support children to have their needs met within mainstream schools. And we are able to support schools, you know, kind of holistically, but also there is funding to support children to have their needs met within mainstream without an education, health and care plan as well. And again, we're looking at that, and we do look at that for children that are waiting for an education, health and care plan. So part of the work that we need to do is look at a more efficient way of doing education, health and care plans in order to make sure children in schools aren't waiting, because that's not a good position for schools or for children. And we're doing some work on that at the moment. I'm looking at what else we could do that would mean that we can assess children's needs, identify what they need, and then also make sure that we've got the right provision in for them as well.
Okay, Gordon.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it right at the end there, Jane. And thanks for all that information. That's very helpful. You touched on it at the end. It is the scenario that obviously schools will be identifying people who require EHCP or other interventions around that, and then they're having to put the resource into doing that. You know, so if somebody requires almost 3 adults to look after them, that is a drain obviously on the school's finances, as you well know. And of course the lag then of getting finances, is the one that causes a real big problem, because they cannot actually, again, I'm making the point, but you're well aware of this, that they cannot just turn around and say, we will not deal with these children, etc., etc. And there is this, as you know, this huge desire to, to make sure that everybody in the school on an inclusive basis is actually dealt with. And I think just a last comment about that, schools are, I think, they do recognise the pressure that your team's under, and from a point of view, they recognise that the individuals within your team and yourself and everybody wants to be doing the right thing. And I think you hit the nail on the head, as we talked about, in terms of resourcing around that, you know, which really just needs to be driven out, because it doesn't look as though the scenario of the increasing EHCPs is anytime soon going to take a downturn, and the impacts from the pandemic, etc., you know, really caused a problem and things to go up. But thank you again, Jane, for that. Thank you.
Jane.
Yeah, just on that, I mean, you're absolutely right. So mainstream schools have the responsibility to educate their children, and they are all in receipt of notional SEND funding, which is to be used to support children's needs to be met within mainstream school. The high needs block funding is for those children whose needs cannot be met in mainstream school without additional support. And that's where the Education, Health and Care Plan assessment comes in. So there is funding within the school system. It is stretched, and it is challenging, and there are mechanisms whereby we can assess need and have a look at how we can support children who don't have an education, health and care plan. So actually there are ways around it, but you're right, the challenge is that the funding is stretched all over the place, and the problem is exacerbated because it is taking us a long time then to undertake those assessments as well.
Has anybody else got any questions? David?
If I may, Chairman, first of all, this is another disturbing report. I do welcome Gordon's contribution here, and I would welcome a report from Gordon. And I'll tell you why, and that is because as county councillors, we have very little information about what goes on within schools. I mean, I didn't realise that Warwickshire was a slightly easier state of affairs than Leicestershire.
Sorry, Chair, you need to bear in mind that's probably anecdotal.
Yeah.
So you see, there was a time when, as county councillors, we acted as the bridge between schools. I mean, I've said this so many times, but nobody takes any notice, that there was a time when we, as county councillors and councillors generally, we acted as a bridge between what was happening in the schools and the community. But that's all been done away with, and we're not now expected to take any interest at all in what goes on in schools. And the problem is with the academy system, which now gets direct funding from the government. It leaves bodies such as county councils with the difficult, challenging subject that we're hearing about this morning, SEN. And I can't see that there's any movement on the part of the government or opposition or anybody else to address this. But we hear about waiting lists for the NHS is going to be addressed. Everybody's going to tackle that. But surely, if NHS waiting lists are going to be tackled, then this is a problem which is up there with that, and there should be a national drive to tackle the waiting lists that we're hearing about this morning. And yet I can't see any sign of anybody putting any extra funding in to this work, which is obviously not, you know, our department is doing its best, and we congratulate everybody who's involved in it. But the basic funding is not there which is going to get this problem under control. I think that there has to be a major shift, and perhaps it might be that this sort of work has now got to be taken over by the NHS, which perhaps is going to be given its funding. I don't know, but we're not going in the right direction with this. No,
Thanks for those comments. Thanks, David. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jane. we hear the phrase EHCP used on a daily basis in our office. We're an independent career service, and of course parents come to us and say, and they almost kind of use it like some, got to be careful what I say, politically contentious. It's almost like they believe it's a kind of a checkbook that they can use till a child is 24. I'm just trying to clarify really issues around the academy status to which my colleague Mr. Bill alluded there. When an academy applies for a child to have an EHCP, Jane, I mean, as we've just said there, academies apply directly to the government for their funding. They bypass all the avenues and conduits of the county council. When they apply for EHCP, do they kind of duck out of that system and then the EHCP becomes our problem? Or is there an expectation that from their direct government funding that they have to make some kind of contribution because initially they were in loco parentis to the child? Can we then go back to academies and say, yes, I understand you want an EHCP, but we would also like access to some of your direct government funding? Or does that child immediately be adopted by the auspices of the county council? There's just some ambiguity around the operational processes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jane.
Yeah, so the finances of the academies and maintained schools in relation to SEND pretty much work in the same way. So academies and maintained schools have that notional SEND grant budget, which is devolved to them for them to manage locally. The high needs block of the dedicated schools grant is managed by the local authority, and the role of that high needs block is for across all schools, whether they're academies or maintained schools. So the code of practice allows any school, whether they're an academy, a private school, a maintained school, to apply for an education, health and care plan for a young person because they are not able to meet that child's needs within the resources that they've got within their organisation. And so they get the same notional SEND grant, they get the same kind of devolved funding as maintained schools. It just comes via a different route. But as a local authority, we've got the responsibility for the kind of SEND support at EHCP level for any child, regardless of where they attend school or college. So they still come through the same system and are entitled to the kind of same level of funding according to need as set out in the Education, Health and Care Plan as any other school is afforded or child.
Sorry, Chair, can I just come back? Because
Yes,
I've not really got the clarity on the answer that I wanted. What I'm asking quite bluntly is, a child who's in an academy is identified with ADHD, autism or a hidden condition. They're obviously hitherto were being funded by the government for that child. The child gets, let's notionally say, gets to 8 years old and we realise that there's an issue here and they need an EHCP. At that point, when the parent or the child, under the recommendation of the EdPsych, goes for the EHCP, is that the point where the school academy trust relinquishes all financial responsibility of that child and then it becomes ours? Because I could see how they would be looking to, how can I say politely, export children off their caseload if A, they've got challenging behaviour or there's issues they can't manage, and B, it actually saves them a few bob and they've made a few quid in the first place. Please excuse the vulgarity of my language, but I'm just trying to keep it simple. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jane.
Yeah, no, apologies. The answer is probably a little bit more complex than that. So if we take a child who is in an academy and they are identified as having additional needs, the academy can make an application for an education, health and care plan. If that plan says those needs can be met in mainstream school, but it requires additional funding, we as a local authority from the high needs block would give the academy some funding to support the education, health and care plan. If the education, health and care plan says, no, that child's needs cannot be met in mainstream, they need to go to a specialist provision, that child would leave the mainstream school and go to a specialist provision that we would fund. But that's the same as it would be for a maintained school, for a FE college, for an academy. So the academy as such doesn't make any money. They are still responsible for the education of that child. The high needs block kind of tops up the education provision for that child. It's in the school's best interest to be inclusive and to support that child to be successful in mainstream. And most of our schools across Leicestershire are really strong at supporting children to be successful in mainstream when it's right for that child and right for the school. Where we come in and where we step in is where we need to provide additional funding on top of the funding that's already given for that child to either an academy or a maintained school. But that's part of the high needs block, which is our responsibility.
Thank you, Chair. We'll let the bone go after this, I promise. It's just my last point. Did the schools or the academies not make sure that there is ample or adequate provision baked into the application for funding they make from the government in the first place?
Yes, so that's part of the education, health and care process, really. So schools across the county are responsible for educating the children that attend those schools, and they are responsible for making sure that their needs can be met. So baked into their provision will be all of the SEND support work, which isn't funded by us, that's delivered by schools. And when they come and ask for an education, health and care plan, we would expect to be seeing that they'd exhausted all other options to support that child, which means that they need an education, health and care plan. And most academies across the county are really good at that. They're really good at using their resources innovatively to support children at SEND support, or looking at how they can best meet their children's needs. And it's only where their needs, those children's needs, just cannot be met in mainstream school, either without additional funding or mainstream's not the right place for that child, that they should be coming to us to ask for an education, health and care plan. But yeah, they use their resources to kind of provide quite innovative support for those children where needed.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Jane, and thanks for greatly increasing my knowledge on EHCPs. Just a couple, if I may, because I think you alluded to a possible light at the end of the tunnel, and I just wanted to explore that. I think you said, and please tell me if I'm wrong, that what you think you might be able to do is that pre-a EHCP being put in place, is it possible to reach an agreement with a parent about what might be provided for that child, so they don't then formally go with it, which would then bypass the need for an educational psychologist? So that's number one. Secondly, when you're talking about new units on schools, are we actively working to look at new schools which are being built to see if they could have a specialist unit on? Because it strikes me that from a capital programme, the cheapest point to put a new unit on is when they're building a new school, as opposed to retrofit one afterwards. So I don't know if we're working with our team to work with the planning authorities locally. And the third one, which slightly worries me, but I hope the answer is I'm an idiot, is you mentioned we've got a few hundred children in private school placements. Does it therefore mean that should Labour get in and impose VAT on those schools, will we get hit with VAT, or are we exempt from VAT increases on the places they provide? Sorry, it's 3 questions.
No, that's fine. So in terms of the pre-HCP work, the quick answer is yes, but it's work with the parents and with the schools. So what we are wanting to do is make sure that only those children that need an education, health and care plan ask or get an education, health and care plan. So we've done a lot of work through the Transforming Centred Inclusion programme around how we can support schools with their inclusive practice. We've developed an inclusive practice toolkit and done a lot of other work that can look at how we can meet children's needs outside of the education, health and care plan process. Now, parents and children are entitled to ask for one, and if they ask for one, we have to do the assessment. But actually, if we can get it right pre-HCP, it's quicker, and it means that they're not waiting for an assessment, but also it means that we can support them. And there are I think probably about 10,000 children supported at SEND support level to be successful in mainstream school. So part of the work we've been doing is how we can increase the capacity within the department to do that work with parents and children in schools to kind of almost keep them away from needing an education, health and care plan. So that's the first bit. The other bit of work that we have introduced is some capacity to work with parents to have a look at the most appropriate settings for their child. And actually talking to parents about which provision could meet the needs of their children, looking at how we can adapt provision. So we have done quite a lot of work, and we've seen a real change and shift in parental choice about provision as a result of that time to really talk through some of those settings as well. In terms of new units, yes, we do. So where we have got new mainstream schools being built, we're looking at space, but also looking at specific units, but also kind of how the space within those schools can be used to be more inclusive. Where we're putting new units onto existing schools, often it's repurposing of a classroom. Sometimes it's a kind of modular building that we're putting in. So there are lots and lots of different ways to increase the number of what we call unit provision or resource-based provision in mainstream schools as well. And then the last question around VAT is, I'm just looking at my finance colleagues because they may be able to answer it. My understanding is no, but my finance colleagues might be able to answer that question better than me.
We can reclaim VAT, so we're kind of, it doesn't worry us too much.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jane. I appreciate you coming along and answering all the questions. Certainly not you're boxed in on many sides, but are clearly doing the best you possibly can. Mr. Bill.
It's a serious report, whichever way you look at it, because I know Jane and the team are doing a wonderful job. We're seeing the graphs going in the wrong direction and the ship is gradually sinking. I mean, what are we actually being asked to do this morning? I mean, we've listened to a serious situation. I mean, are you asking us to make representation to try to address the situation? What do you want us to do?
So I can talk a bit about some of the stuff we're doing. This is an update on the risk. So we are at the moment reporting back on risk 7.7, and essentially I think the presentation is saying that the risk remains at the level it's remaining and that we're not proposing that it is reduced in any way. So this is an update on that risk. Just in terms of some of the things that are happening, and as a council we have made representations nationally around the challenge that this is placing not just on the capacity of the department but on the financial position of the local authority as a whole. In terms of some of the work that's going on nationally, the DfE have introduced a number of initiatives that are working to target this area around funding. So, we're part of the Delivering Better Value programme, which is expecting us to bring ourselves in line financially. And we're also piloting the green paper reforms around SEND as well. So there are a number of national initiatives going on, and the government are well aware that this is a significant financial challenge for many authorities. We're probably in about a middle position in Leicestershire compared to other authorities in this space as well. So there are a number of initiatives going on, and we have made a number of representations to national government on this matter over the last couple of years as well.
And Jane, the children and family scrutiny are looking at this on a regular basis. So it's not we're just looking at the risk, but they have got this monitored.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, that was the other bit I was going to mention, both in terms of the schools front and information around schools, but also this programme. So on a 6-monthly basis, the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee are receiving an update on the work that we're doing around the Transforming SEND and Inclusion programme, which will have a direct impact on this risk as well. But the Overview and Scrutiny Committee also receive information around the local authorities' role with education as well, and the kind of relationship with schools. And we regularly provide an update to that committee around both school performance, but also our role in relation to supporting schools more generally, as well as with special educational needs as well.
Thank you very much, Jane. So I understand the slides are going to be circulated to members, and we know that the Children and Family Scrutiny are looking at this on a regular basis. It is a national problem, and it's reassuring actually to hear what you've said, because clearly there are concerns, but there are limits to what you can do given the resources. The educational psychologists were 80 short, and it can't be just unique to this. But we are looking at it on a regular basis, which is reassuring. But thank you, Jane, for coming along, and thank you, Lindsay. And we'll now move on to the other risk report, and we'll go on to Neil.
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, we'll go back into the main report now. So, which is the routine update on the corporate risk register. Paragraph 5 explains the external auditor put forward a recommendation that we should link those risks now to strategic plan outcomes. So that's been done in the appendix. Paragraph 7 to 12 of the report summarises there were some risk movement again throughout this cycle and gives the rationale for how they've moved. So on this occasion, 1 risk has been added, 2 have been removed, and 3 have been amended, either in terms of the score or description. That always proves that the risk register is dynamic and challenges do come forth. Just before moving to the appendix, just want to touch on the back half of the report really, which is about our counter fraud work in paragraphs 14 to 25. And at paragraph 17, it was pleasing that we had a peer review of the way we approach conformance to the CIPFA Code of Practice on fraud. So City Council, Leicester City Council peer reviewed that and gave us a positive report back on that. And then just some other work we've done on counter fraud. We've reviewed our mid-term review of fraud risk. We've begun to plan and inform members and staff about the next National Fraud Initiative, and that starts in September. And also we've just done some minor piece of work reporting on frauds undertaken for the Local Government Transparency Code. The main focus of this paper is always the appendix, which is starting on page 139, and that's the up-to-date position on corporate risks at the end of April. So I'll be happy to take any questions on the report or the appendix.
Thank you, Neil. Bill.
Yes, Chair. It's nice to see that Arriva's been taken off the risk at long last after months and years of negotiation. And it says that it's been set within what we expected it to cost. Is that a fair comment on the finance side? Did we expect this amount of compensation to be paid, or it doesn't actually say what?
I don't know the exact figure, but I do know that it is well within the provision that we put aside for it. So it ended up coming in below, but I don't know the exact figure off the top of my head at the moment.
Okay. So you made a saving what we thought it was going to cost.
I believe that's the case, yeah.
Okay, so thank you for that, Neil. Are there any other questions or queries? Terry?
Thanks, Chair. Neil, page 139, the very first one on there, cost of living crisis. I noticed we've reduced one of the ratings. I couldn't work out what measure we'd reduced it, you know, what caused the measure to be reduced. So what are we assessing to assess the cost of living crisis, if that makes sense? I mean, I know we mention children's and family services, but we don't mention adult services. And we don't mention cost on us of, you know, increased salaries and, you know, contracts, etc. But I wonder what was the measure that caused it to change?
Sorry, with inflation changes, makes it a little bit easier. I know that's going to take some time to go through. However, unfortunately, Jane's left the room now, but she wanted to maintain the risk in there for children because of the emergency payments that are still filtering through. So section 17, section 25, are they? So it's a sort of balancing act at the moment. But yeah, I know you've asked this question before in terms of what are we actually measuring it against, but there's a whole range of, yeah, no, yeah.
Okay, so any further questions? No? Right, so we are moving to recommendations which are set out on page 137. We asked to, regarding recommendation A, the committee is asked to approve the current state of the strategic risks facing the County Council. I'm happy to move this recommendation. Can I have a seconder? Thank you. All in favour? That's fine, that's unanimous. Regarding recommendation B, regarding a presentation, we're going to defer a decision on that. I will work with Neil and we'll come back and advise you what we're going to do on that. With regard to recommendation C, we will take the update regarding the counter fraud as being duly noted. Is everybody happy with that? Okay, so moving on to the next item. This is the Resilience and Business Continuity Annual Update. Zafar Salim, Head of Communities, Policies and Resilience, will introduce the item. He's joined by Mark Walden, Local Resilience Forum and Partnership Manager. So Zafar, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points from me before I hand over to Mark, and we do have a presentation which supplements the actual report. I think on the second slide, you can see there's been a couple of points where historically we've been back to this committee and members have raised some concerns about not losing all the lessons that have been learned and making sure they're in a single point and then they were followed through. So that has been picked up and that forms part of the agenda of the resilience planning group, which is basically the chief officers that meet more at the tactical level rather than strategic level to make sure they're followed through. And then secondly, the issue around notification of members when there are incidents, and with the agreement we've reached again through the resilience planning group and comms is that will be a matter for the on-call senior manager who is actually responding to the incidents concerned, because you'll see from the presentation that Mark has delivered, we've had numerous incidents from Storm Henk to the issues out in Ratby and various other ones. Luckily it's gone, touch wood, it's gone quiet for a couple of weeks, but they're of such magnitude. For example, at City Council with the cyber attack, no one really knows what is around the corner other than it's very unpredictable. So we'll leave the in terms of what information gets down to members at that divisional level, it'll be decided on a case-by-case basis. So that's all I was going to say as an intro.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So one of the main policy developments nationally is the introduction of the UK Government Resilience Framework. Essentially what this is the government's aim by 2030 to have a new way that we approach resilience nationally. It's based on 3 key tenets: development of a shared understanding of the civil contingency risks we face. So recently in last Christmas, they released a National Resilience Register, which is a large register of 92 risks across 7 themes that we are required locally to look at and whether they apply to us. And that goes through the Local Resilience Forum framework, and we will publish a community risk register, which has been approved by the Exec Board and will go out to a more public-facing document as soon as that's able to do so. That ultimately focuses our work. We will look to identify the top risks and we will make sure that we've got plans and procedures in place to respond to those. The other one is prevention rather than sort of responding to it. Prevention rather than cure is always going to be better, looking at how we can implement that locally. And then the other one is resilience as a whole of society endeavour. So historically, it might have been seen as what we refer to as category 1 responders, so emergency services, local authorities, health organisations. It's our role to be resilient. Well, actually, this looks to expand that now by how we engage with the community, how we engage with businesses, and how we engage with residents. What it's currently rolling out is a pilot structure for local resilience forums across 8 LRFs nationally. It's looking at how we can better engage with elected members through more direct accountability. How can we ensure our elected representatives that we are doing what we need to do? It's looking to introduce a new role, which is the Chief Resilience Officer. So they will be responsible across a whole policy range of looking at how they can increase resilience and looking at planning at an early stage, looking at climate change. How can that all be fed in to make sure that we are able to prevent incidents rather than having to respond to them all the time? Interestingly enough, the first advert for one of those has gone out in Thames Valley, which is one of the pilot areas. The aim is that they'll do that pilot for around 2 years, and then they will look to recommend what the structure looks like locally and what we should look to adopt. As it says on that slide there, they will be responsible to locally elected members. In Thames Valley, it is the Police and Crime Commissioner. Elsewhere, I know that other LRFs are looking at different structures, so it might be the Combined Fire Authority. The idea is to try and see where does it best fit, and which provides that detailed oversight. And then again, they're just reinforcing that point around democratic leaders will have a clear role in ensuring that. So, reporting at an LRF level. In terms of key metrics, one of the key pieces of work that we did last year was look at the Local Resilience Forum funding model. Historically, ourselves, along with Leicester City, have been the highest sort of financially contributing members to that. And what we did is we revised that based on organisational expenditure. So now we have a formula that is based directly on what that share of that organisation's expenditure is within the county. So what it meant for us was that we saw a reduction, and other colleagues have actually seen an increase in what they would contribute financially to the LRF. But it gives us a much more of an evidential based formula for going forward. It's something that we can easily sort of refresh on an annual basis as people's sort of budgets fluctuate. In terms of the Resilience Partnership Duty Officer, so this is the 24/7 provision of my team. So we act as the first sort of call from the emergency services, trying to get in contact with all 10 local authorities. We've had about 283 calls through the year. That will be a mixture of the Environment Agency issuing flood warnings and alerts, to police and fire asking us for support in terms of providing rest centres or on the ground support. So a real varied range of calls. 128 of those in hours, 155 of those out of hours. Out of hours is anything outside of 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. We've had 14 incidents that's required a significant response. Now, for the County Council, that may be in terms of supporting the multi-agency structure. One of my key roles as the LRF manager is to look at how we do that multi-agency structure, but also the team's response in terms of supporting the internal County Council response. We've currently revised our on-call senior manager training to a much more detailed programme that's aligned to relevant national occupational standards. So that puts us in a really good defensible position if we ever have an incident that we need to respond to. One of the key learnings from the Manchester Arena inquiry, and also if you look at the Grenfell inquiry, as we're expected to see more publications and recommendations, is around the training and being able to evidence that training is up to a suitable standard, delivered by people of a suitable standard. And we've got a much better audit trail now behind that. So the LRF procured a system which allows us to track on-call senior manager attendance at training, and we're currently sitting around 72%. One of our aims is obviously to get that high as we can, recognising that actually this is a new period of training that we've had to implement. One of the key pieces of work for the business continuity team was around tabletop exercises following a cyber incident, and making sure that key services are prepared, they can get access to their business continuity plans, they know who to call, when to call, and that sort of recognises the increased risk that cyber poses across the area. In terms of incident response, so Zafar's just mentioned there, Storm Henk was obviously a big one at the start of the year. Around 600 to 700 properties flooded within Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. So in terms of people I've spoken to, the most significant flooding event in that they can remember in their working history. Multi-agency wise was a response that was set up, and we structured and we supported that as a team. Leading on at the end of January was the Ratby Kirby Muxloe incident. In my mind, and hopefully you'll recognise this, was an excellent example of local authorities working together along with voluntary organisations to support their residents. One of the things I'm most proud about is that we didn't get much involvement from the police or fire. Now, the reason I'm quite happy about that is because it shows that we were supporting residents. People are very quick to call 999 if they feel that they're not getting what they need or they need support. But actually, the stuff we were able to implement really supported residents through that one. And another one, a major incident response, was we supported Leicester City Council at Radio 2. You may remember on the Sunday evening we had some quite heavy rainfall which damaged a train track, and that actually meant that there was potential for a number of people to be stranded within Leicester City. So we quickly mobilised some officers and looked to set up some rest centres there. Lessons identified. So these are sort of a summary of lessons that we've identified. The one of it is, as a council, we focus a lot on strategic and tactical response to our senior managers, our most senior managers. What we need to do now is look locally, so look more operationally around individual teams and departments and how they can support an incident and a response. And one thing Ratby and Kirby Muxloe did was highlight the need for other departments who may not normally consider themselves as part of a major incident to actually get them involved, because they've got some really good skill sets and knowledge that we can utilise. Data is a very difficult one for us. So being able to collate multiple lists of vulnerable people from multiple organisations to come up with a master list is actually really challenging. In the Ratby incident, I've referred to the Ratby one, we had about 6 lists that we were looking for. We had 2 from ourselves, Severn Trent, Cadent Gas had their own list, Districts and Boroughs had their own list, NHS had their own list. And what we were trying to do was door knock, but make sure that we only knocked once. What we didn't want to do was really annoy people by knocking 5 times because they're on different lists. So how we collate that list together to a single version of the truth and act upon that is a key piece of work we're taking forward. And then again, with data and information sharing, quite often we get sort of nervousness about sharing information, which is absolutely right. But it's just making sure that people are fully aware that within the Civil Contingencies Act, there is a provision for sharing information at times of emergencies. And the Information Commissioner's Office has accepted and does the advice they give out is actually in an emergency, you can share data. And just as much as why you would have to defend why you shared it, you would also have to defend why you did not share it as well. So it's important that we can raise that awareness. That's the end of the presentation, Chairman.
Thanks very much, Mark. It quite a huge amount of work and really keeping members advised of the time of incident. But there are so many other parties that you've got to work with. But thanks for that. Has anybody got any queries or questions on that? Yeah, Terry.
Thanks for that. I suppose it's where you started from, really, both of you, is where we can take it to. So if we take the Ratby Kirby Muxlow incident, which I think initially was handled excellently by this council working with the boroughs and districts. I'd like to give a shout out because it didn't happened in the council chamber on Wednesday. I think our local area coordinators should have got some praise in the chamber. So I'll take the opportunity to do that now, if I may. But when the Cabinet portfolio holder gave a report on it to full council on Wednesday, it was clear from his level of frustration that there were people still out there without cooking facilities, etc. Because I think he mentioned it's being passed to insurance companies by, I think, Severn Trent before they can get anything. So will the national bit you were talking about earlier, does that give us a vehicle to go to central government, say, look, something's got to be put in place that you can't have a blockage to somebody having a new boiler or a ruined cooker if that's what they need in, we're talking several months ago now. I mean, I was quite astonished when Ozzy made his statement that there were still considerable numbers of people that haven't been looked after. So is there anything this trial might do or anything we can already do to feed this up to central government to hopefully put some shortcuts in?
It's a very good question, and I think it's one that with greater political oversight means that we can maybe feed things up the chain as it needs to be. What we are doing in terms of that engagement with Severn Trent as a whole is I have a draft letter ready to go for Severn Trent in terms of recouping our costs. That's a letter going to be written in conjunction with Hinckley and Blaby councils as well, and we're just waiting for Hinckley's figures on terms of staff expenditure. That's going to go. In terms of Severn Trent's engagement in the incident, there were some challenges there that we had to escalate via DEFRA and the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities with our links there. Engagement with utilities companies is often a challenge because they cover such vast areas. So I think in terms of that, go back to your questions about the political oversight, it's certainly something that would be beneficial in terms of raising those challenges. And I know that we've done it at an officer level through our multi-agency structures. So we had what we refer to as a recovery coordinating group meeting that recently just stood down about 2 weeks ago, because what they would do was essentially have the same conversations over and over again, exactly around this point. And I know Zafar himself has sat and conversed with Severn Trent around the issues and the difficulties around it.
Okay, thank you. Have we got any other questions? No. Well, thank you very much, Zafar and Mark, for the presentation. Appreciated. So we are asked to note this report. Is everybody happy to do that? Yep. Okay. So moving on to the next item, we've got the clinical governance overview. We've got just Sean Mavi, Assistant Director of Public Health, to introduce this item, and she is joined by Catherine Blake-Smith, who is the Department Lead for Clinical Governance. I think she's on. Oh no, you're here. I thought you were online. No, fine. So, Shoshana, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just to put a bit of context to this presentation. In November, this committee considered a report setting out the Public Health Department's clinical governance processes. It was suggested by the committee that a further update be provided that focused more around the governance processes and structures rather than the operational detail. And at that time, it was also suggested that an internal audit is undertaken to provide assurances around the council's clinical governance arrangements to make sure that to evidence that they're robust and that the information is proportionate in terms of the information we provide to our elected members. So at this point, I'll hand over to Kat to sort of focus on those two elements, and then I'll pick up at the end.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So just a reminder, our clinical governance processes form and contribute to our public health strategy, and that's about providing robust, highly effective services. I'm not going to go into too much detail. I know the committee was previously cited on the full annual report, but we're talking about our main clinical contracts. So these are the integrated substance misuse service, our 0 to 11 Healthy Child Programme provider that is run by Leicestershire Partnership Trust, Healthy Together Service, Sexual Health Services, and then NHS Health Checks. So as a reminder again, clinical governance is a systematic approach to maintaining high quality care, and we're presenting to the committee how we approach this within public health. We've got a range of documents that form a suite of our operational governance processes, and these are from how our admin staff and our strategic leads deal with incidents when they come in. So this is showing how clinical governance process is a thread that runs through all of our processes within the commissioning cycle. So right from procurement to contract management, and then how we review that as a department and escalate to DMT when needed. So elements of clinical governance that we use are the quality reports that are provided from those commissioned services. Some of the KPIs that services are evaluated on relate to clinical governance, the serious incidents that may happen within clinical providers, and we also have feedback from clinical audits, and we also engage in clinical governance visits, and these are quality visits where we go and visit the provider over a week. So our internal governance in the process in our department starts off with a contract management, and that's discussing all the details of what's been going on in those services, including audits, like I say, changes in their policy, how providers may be implementing new national guidance. The quality reports will then go to the clinical governance group that's chaired by myself. We will decide in that meeting anything of significance that needs to be escalated to DMT. And then by exception, if there was something that needed to go to the Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee, we would take that. So it could be that there was concerns with the way that an incident had been managed. So as an example, for procurement processes, we ensure that every provider has a robust clinical governance process in place, and this will be, we review all their policy and procedure documents. They're required to have a robust clinical audit cycle in place, and we'll also look at their previous Care Quality Commission reports and how they are progressing any actions. Contract management, so we have an internal contract management framework, and we also have oversight for the clinical serious incidents, and obviously we look at KPIs and the quality visits. So just to give you an example of how one of our quality visits would work, so it would, with the regularity of these, would be dependent on the high risk, the contract value and how risk they were. They would include engagement with service users. It could be a focus group, and then we will complete a report of all our findings, which would be agreed at DMT, and we would look at the actions from those. So for example, we completed a quality visit to a provider, and all the evidence that we received gave us assurance of high quality arrangements in place and dissemination of learning from when investigations had been completed. But actually our interviews with frontline staff identified that they weren't always aware of why changes have been put into place. So actually, there was an intervention that was put in place to ensure that learning was really understood by frontline staff. Another example of an audit that was undertaken was around drug and alcohol deaths. So our provider has a duty to inform us as commissioners when there has been a death of a service user who is in receipt of care. And actually, we cross-reference the reports given to public health with the provider's management system, and we were provided with full assurance, and as it was 100% accuracy. So serious incidents within clinical providers, these are incidents where there's been an act or an omission of care that has led to serious harm, or it could be a near miss that could have caused serious harm. So at the moment, providers need to notify us within 72 hours of an incident happening. We are then given the opportunity to read and comment on their interim 72-hour report. The provider will then complete a robust investigation that we are sent, and we will then sign it off if we are happy that the learning's been identified and appropriate actions have been put in place. So to give the committee an example of a serious incident is that the provider notified us that there'd been a medication error. So this was in line with one of the patient grief directives that we have in place, where a cohort of patients experiencing the same symptoms or needs can be given a medication without the need for a doctor to write a prescription. So it could be antibiotics, so it could be immunisation. And actually what happened was that it was identified that the wrong medication was given because they found that actually the box of the medication was very similar to another one, and we could see that the duty of candour, so the patients who have been affected were notified and were supported appropriately. And actually we were also able to the provider identified mistakes in the chain of the dispensing of the medication as well, but we were ensured about how the robustness of the investigation, and we sought assurance that that learning has been put in place. Now, I think this is the most relevant slide, because I think before there was some questions that were asked over how sort of the safeguarding boards or other functions within the system were involved. And actually, on notification of a serious incident within a clinical service, so this could be harm, it could be death of a service user, the provider will instigate their patient safety process. But also this could be from notification from the safeguarding partnerships. It could be that there was a death of a child where abuse or neglect is suspected. It could be a domestic homicide where that service user was under the care of the clinical provider. So, but also a provider may identify an incident within their service, and they may feel that as an NHS organisation or a large trust that they need to notify the safeguarding partnerships because it may meet criteria for a review. But for us in public health, once we're notified of the incident, it will initiate our internal processes, and this is around those provider quality meetings and contract meetings where we scrutinise the actions of that service. From that point, anything relevant will be taken to our public health clinical governance group, and where necessary, items or events will be escalated to our department, DMT. And then from there, if needed, we could go to the Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee. But actually, what's useful to know is that providers also have a regulatory requirement to notify the CQC on certain incidents of harm. And so that process would run alongside our clinical governance processes, contract managers and commissioners. And ultimately, if we took an incident or something that we were concerned about clinical care to DMT, and we were not satisfied that the provider had responded appropriately or was not progressing improvements in care, we could ultimately notify the CQC as the legal regulator of that service. Also to be aware, all of this comes into the context of those statutory processes for learning from death. So it could be LEADER, so every death of individual with learning disabilities or autism was reviewed to see what could happen and how we could improve care for that population. And also every death of a child is also reviewed in CDOP, and these processes run alongside our clinical governance process. There's also some local forums around drug and alcohol related deaths, the suicide audit and the prevention group, and then the ICB have now got a learning from deaths forum. And then annually we have been coming to this committee for an annual clinical governance report. Just to note, one significant development that is we are working with our NHS providers is the new NHS Patient Framework Incident Response Framework. I won't go into too much detail, but this is about NHS providers having a really good understanding of their patient safety profile, using individualised data to really look at drawing down on the learning rather than implementing a sort of standardised approach to every single incident. So we're working with our NHS providers to look at that at the moment.
Last bit that came out of the committee meeting in November was a request for a light touch internal audit to take place, just to assess our clinical governance processes. The outcome of that was an opinion of substantial assurance that the Council's clinical governance arrangements are sound, and that work involved identifying processes undertaken in other similar authorities, and it was found that we had much stronger arrangements. So actually we've now got other authorities reaching out to us wanting to nab our paperwork and our processes, so that's reassuring. And so because of that, because of the light touch audit and the work that we've presented, I guess a request came out of that suggesting that this arrangement that we've got in place with the annual update to this committee be amended so that we go to the scrutiny committee and almost sort of decoupling the arrangement with yourselves. I think this is an historic arrangement when there wasn't such a process in place. But now that we do have that process through the Public Health Departmental Clinical Governance Group, up to our departmental management team, up to scrutiny and then external bodies, that we don't provide the annual update here on the basis that we're providing assurance elsewhere.
Thanks very much. Thank you both very much for that. That seems quite logical. Has anybody got any questions they'd ask? Terry.
Thanks, Chair. Could I just make the recommendations this committee based on Joshna's last comment that, well, first of all, thank you both for coming back, giving us the assurances about corporate governance we'd asked for, which I think we're all very happy with. And secondly, could I recommend to this committee that we accept the recommendation, there's too many recommendations that Joshna made, that I think it now should go to its rightful place, which is Health Overview Scrutiny Committee, who will pick this up annually.
I'd second that. So with that, we're asked to note the report. Is everybody happy to do that? Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for coming on. Thank you. So the next item is the annual Treasury Management Report. Nick Walsh, Head of Finance, will present the item. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Chair. Just before I start on that, could I just come back on the point about Arriva? So the amount we'd actually set aside as a reserve creditor was £500,000. The actual figure ended up being 270,000, around that area. So just
thank you, Nick.
Okay, so this report looks back at the Treasury management activity over the 23-24 financial year. It also incorporates the specifics of the final quarter of that year to avoid a separate report which duplicates information. The report's a formal requirement of the CIPFA Code of Practice, whereby it's necessary to report annually on Treasury management by the end of September, after the end of the financial year. Following today's meeting, the report will be taken to Cabinet for the meeting on the 21st of June, together with any comments arising from today's meeting. Starting on the section, paragraph 5, this summarises the latest economic assessment provided by Link, which is attached as Appendix A. We've talked many times around the impact of inflation on global unrest, which has continued to cause uncertainty in terms of longer-term interest rate expectations. However, the Bank of England base rates have remained at 5.25% now since last August, and were held at that rate again in the last review at the start of this month. The sort of latest information coming from the Bank of England, though, is more positive in terms of its expectations on inflation being under control, and indeed CPI, continues to fall. The bank is now strongly suggesting that a reduction in the base rate will be forthcoming later this year, and possibly it may even come as early as next month. In terms of economic growth, quarter 4 in 2023 saw negative growth, 0.3%, and also there was negative growth across the year as a whole at 0.2%. However, the latest release from the Office of National Statistics has shown a better than expected recovery, with growth of 0.6% in quarter 1 of 2024. This obviously supports the more optimistic economic assessment from the Bank of England. Paragraph 10 states that there were no further debt rescheduling carried out in the final quarter of 23-24. And then paragraph 11 confirms that during the quarter, Treasury management activity was undertaken within the Treasury and prudential indicators, as has been the case over the rest of the year. Paragraphs 12 and 13 report that there was £21 million of actual interest received over the course of the 23-24 financial year, which was 7.4 million more than was budgeted. Although obviously with rates expected to reduce, this is unlikely to be repeated. There will be some continued benefit of the high rates, though, given that loans are provided over a 6 to 12 month period, and we're still putting out loans now of in excess of 5%. The interest earned, moving on to paragraphs 14 to 17, these just gives up an early heads up on activity undertaken in the first quarter of this financial year. And in particular, that a further £10 million of loan has been repaid. The loan was at 3.99% for a further 31 years. And by redeeming at this stage, a discount of 1.1 million was received, meaning that only 8.9 million of principal was repaid. Details of that will be included in the formal quarter 1 report for 24-25. Moving down on the section beginning at paragraph 18, all Treasury management activity through the year was undertaken in line with the policy statement agreed in February 23 by full council, and also based on Link Asset Services approved counterparty list. All loans were repaid with interest on time during the financial year. Paragraph 21 notes that no loans were made to another local authority during the year. Local authorities continue to be a very safe investment, but nonetheless, it's still important to undertake appropriate due diligence. Unfortunately, opportunities for local authority loans tend to be snapped up quite quickly, and so the few that have come up have disappeared really before we've had a chance to undertake that due diligence. But obviously, we will look at how we can kind of make that a sort of bit more of a slick process, so that we don't continue to miss out on that. Paragraphs 22 to 23, it's necessary to inform the committee of any counterparty downgrading during the period of an existing loan, where it would breach the limit for a new loan to that counterparty. And during quarter 4, this situation occurred with Close Brothers. They were downgraded by Link. At that point, we had 35 million invested with them. But the key thing to note, as I've mentioned already, that, well, including the 2 that were due to redeem last year and the 1 that was due to redeem in the new financial year, they've all now been fully repaid with full interest. In terms of the debt position, paragraph 27 onwards, no new loans were taken during the 23-24 financial year. 42.6 million was repaid during the period, mostly due to the early repayments highlighted in the quarterly reports over the year. Table in paragraph 28 summarises the long-term debt position, and how it has changed over the year. And just a reminder that there are two categories of debt, one where the interest rate is fixed and the other where the lender can up the rate, but at that point we would have the opportunity to repay without penalty. So the overall debt portfolio at the end of the year totaled 219.5 million, average interest rate of 6.08%. Paragraph 29 refers to the shortfall on the 24-28 capital programme of 93 million, which is worth noting this is down from 124 million pounds when we looked at this a year ago. It's expected that the council's buoyant balance sheet will allow this to be funded by borrowing against internal balances, and so no new external loans are expected to be required in the short term. But of course, this will mean lower cash balances going forwards, and as such, lower levels of returns on short-term investments as well. Moving on to a section from paragraph 31, this talks about the historic borrowing position. It references the fact that at the start of the year, the council's position was over borrowed by 54 million. This has fallen to 18 million by the end of the year. And the opportunities for early repayment of debt have basically moved us in that direction. 93 million shortfall on the capital programme that I mentioned just now to be funded from internal borrowing will see this position move into under borrowed territory over the course of the MTFS. The chart in paragraph 36 shows that the long-term debt position is unlikely to change significantly over 20, at least for another 20 years, given the maturity profile on the long-term debt position. So moving on to investments, paragraph 37, you'll see that the average return for the financial year was 5.08%, and that compared to the average Bank of England base rate over that period of 5.03% and the average overnight rate of 4.97%. Over a longer time frame, 5 years, the portfolio has earned an average of 1.79%, again compared to the average base rate of 1.65 and the average overnight rate of 1.61. And then in terms of paragraph 40 onwards, this refers to the benchmarking report that we've received from Link, which is attached as Appendix D. And what this shows is over the last financial year, Leicestershire achieved an average weighted return, which includes bank risk share on private debt of 5.49%. And that compares to the average for county councils of 5.26% and 5.24% for the benchmarking group. And all figures are obviously up against the equivalent figures from last year when the underlying base rate was much less. And in terms of private debt and bank risk share, paragraph 42 highlights that in isolation, these achieved an average return of 6.85%. So that was all I was going to say, Chair. My comments.
Thank you very much, Nick. Bill.
Mentioned Close Brothers earlier on. Come off the list. We've got other debts with them, have we not? Other loans with them?
Oh, no, all the ones that we had with them have been repaid, and then obviously we won't give them any more loans. Yes, they have, yes, until such time as their credit rating improves again.
Yeah, okay. They're one of our partners we've worked with for many years, weren't they?
Yes, they've been on our counterparty list for quite a while. That's right.
Thanks. So if there are no other questions, then thank you, Nick. We are asked to note the report, which will be presented to Cabinet in June. So moving on to the next item, it's Revised Members' Code of Good Practice. Lauren Haslam, Director of Law and Governance, will present this item. Over to you, Lauren.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Hopefully a short and I hope uncontroversial report. I'm seeking members' approval to a minor change to the Planning Code of Conduct. The code that we've adopted here at the County Council reflects a model code produced by lawyers in local government with input from regulatory and advisory bodies such as the LGA and the Ombudsman. Earlier this year, the code was revised and updated simply to introduce a new paragraph relating to the use of social media by members of planning committees and in our case, the DCRB. If the committee is happy with the additional paragraph, which is at paragraph 9 on page 228, which is simply the two references there to the social media powers, then the chief exec can exercise delegated powers to amend the code, and it'll form part of the constitution in the usual way. Chair, thank you. Yes, thank you, Chair. Hopefully, again, another short item. A number of councils have taken advice relatively recently from King's Council on the interface between DPIs and members when they are discussing payment of member allowances. A view has been reached by some of the barristers concerned that discussions of allowances is a DPI. That's because the definition is quite wide, and it refers simply to an office holding, and you are office holders as members, carried out for profit or gain, and that potentially therefore brings in member allowances within the scope of the DPI. So I'm suggesting a very cautious approach here, but I'm doing so because a failure to declare a DPI is a criminal offence, so it's obviously very significant for members. The way to address it is to grant a standing dispensation to all members, simply to avoid any risk for members, but secondly also to allow business on member allowances to be transacted. Otherwise, it'd be necessary for everyone to declare an interest and potentially leave the room, which obviously leaves the position stymied, really. So it's a pragmatic approach and a cautious approach. I'm recommending, Chair, that the dispensation is granted for the rest of this council term, and then in the new council term we have a further report to cover dispensation for the following 4-year term. The other part of the report is simply to add a standard form onto the member portal for other dispensations, simply so there's a straightforward process for members to seek a dispensation when they wish to do so. Thank you, Chair. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Lauren. So, do we have any comments or questions? It's fairly straightforward. I don't think there's anything else to say, really. Oh, Don. You certainly can. Yeah. So, thank you, John. The committee is asked to grant a dispensation for a period of 1 year to all members of the County Council in relation to considering and voting on any matter as a result of an interest that may arise due to receiving an allowance from the County Council. And B, to approve the form for future requests for dispensation. I'm happy to move these recommendations. And John, are you happy to second those? Yeah? Yeah. Okay, is that agreed? That's everybody right. So, committee, we've been going for 3 hours now. What would you prefer to do? Would you like to have a half-an-hour break for lunch and come back, or would you want to press on? It's up to you. All right, okay. What was the committee like to do? Do you want a break? Okay, press on. All right, we'll do that. So, okay, that's fine. Provisional draft annual governance statement 23 to 24. Neil Jones, Head of Internal Audit, will introduce this report. So, Neil, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. So, yes, this is the provisional draft annual governance statement for 23-24. And the report explains the approach I've taken to producing the provisional draft. The AGS is a statutory requirement. It accompanies the financial statements. It's a document that looks back over the year to see if we applied SIPFA's SOLACE good governance principles over the year. Throughout I emphasise it's a provisional draft. The rules are that we have to bring it to a committee, and the committee obviously is this May committee before the accounts are lodged on the website in June. What we will do is any changes to the AGS in between today and that period in June, we will inform members. So the cover report explains the legal background to requiring the governance statement, the approach we've taken and the outcome of the annual review. Followed the same procedures as last year, but with a number of officers involved in those procedures have changed over the years. So there was whilst it was the same process, there was a lot more challenge and review this time around, but fresh views, if you like. So the appendix, starting on page 245, is the AGS itself, and it explains a range of internal and external assurances and governance arrangements, and also with the large commercial and collaborative arrangements. Section 7 explains progress in improving what we defined last year as significant governance issues. And then Section 8, this year I am reporting 2 new significant governance issues. We have a meeting with senior officers to agree those and apply against a set of criteria. I just need to apologise, Chair, for the cover report recommendation 22B. It actually refers to 3 issues. This year, I can confirm it is actually only 2. That's an amendment. Section 9, there's references to future challenges. A lot of these continue to be monitored by this committee as corporate risks. And then finally, the annex starting at page 263 are some areas for further development in the forthcoming year. That's all I've got to say, Chair, really. Take any questions, happy.
Lovely. Thank you. Thanks very much. So has anyone got any queries or questions on it? It's a fairly straightforward report. So if that's the case, moving to the recommendations, which are in the pack 220 on pages 242 to 43. Regarding recommendation A, we agreed that the provisional draft annual government statement as set out in the appendix are consistent with the committee's own perspective on the internal call within the authority. Is that agreed? Thank you. And we're asked to take the recommendations B, C and D, and Neil Jones has already indicated there are only 2 significant governance issues reported in the report rather than 3 as indicated in the report. So are we happy to accept that? Agreed? That's all. So on to item 19, which is the internal audit report. Again, over to you, Neil.
Thanks again, Chair. So this is back with my audit hat on now, and a reminder that we have to apply the public sector internal audit standards, and part of the requirement of that is that I present an annual report. That completes the cycle of work undertaken during the previous year, 23-24. There are certain requirements to incorporate in the report, and the most important being, my opinion on the overall adequacy and effectiveness of the Council's control environment, and that is its systems of governance, risk management and internal control. So in Annex 1, which starts on page 277, I break down how I've reached the opinion this year and explain how I use a combination of evidence to reach that opinion. So the findings of audits that we've undertaken, and then a lot of other information that I gather from other assurance providers, some internal, some external. At the time of writing this report, I know we discussed this earlier on today, I hadn't received from the head of internal at Nottingham City Council his 23-24 opinion, so their work is still ongoing. So I am keeping an eye on that, as we discussed earlier on the control environment at EMS. There were some high importance recommendations in the previous year, and little bit of extra involvement with investigations, and the position with EMS, as we've discussed, will need to be monitored. But overall, I think on the top of page 282, I have concluded that the Council's control environment remained overall adequate and effective for the year. Page 271 is the actual annual report, and after some background, I then go into more context on the information contained in Appendix 2. So overall, there was an increase in assurance audit, Those few that did return partial assurance ratings will continue to be followed up at this committee until I'm satisfied that action has been taken place. We undertook a number of information security risk assessments. Always important to know that information is secure. There was a slight decrease in closing off investigations, but there are a number of investigations still in train. I'm actively monitoring those in case they are depicting any weaknesses in the control environment. Paragraph 15, I have oversight of other functions and that helps me to form an opinion. But then I have to mention what's known as impairment because I manage the risk management process. I have to put that into the charter. So there's controls around that in the charter. So the table on paragraph 19, that's reflecting the wide scope of the service and shows that due to a full staff contingent and low absenteeism, very low absenteeism, there is overall increases in audits and work done. There was a large budget underspend and we have generally received good service ratings. I know there's a report on the external quality assessment, but that was very positive. And the assessor saying that the service receives favourable feedback from clients who are appreciative of the approachable, flexible and client-focused support. All of that is headlined in the cover report in paragraph 10. I think that's all I have to say, really, Chair.
Thank you very much. Has anybody got any queries or questions on that? No? Terry.
Just a quick one, Chairman. I wonder if we can just amend the paragraph in the first bit, or if it might be too late about Nottingham, bearing in mind the conversation we've had this morning, just to make it a bit more forceful. And just out of sheer interest, I'm sure it's been on there before, but I probably never noticed it. Shows what 3 AM does for you. Page 285. What internal audit do we do on food banks? Yeah. I mean, why is food banks on there? In essence, is my question.
Oh, sorry. It's because we provide grant funding to them. So it was just that they were adequately using the grant funding account. They have to account back through to Zafra's team who yeah. It's an audit of the grant funding, to be fair, rather than the food bank itself.
Yeah, just on that one, I mean, I suppose it's an interesting one. I mean, clearly grant funding to food banks. I mean, are we comfortable that's worked? Because I know there's quite a lot of food banks which are attached to churches, for instance. And obviously you're not allowed as an authority to provide grant funding to any food bank where their accounts are co-mingled with the church accounts. So are we actually doing these effectively? Because I'm certainly aware of some across the county where we appear to have given grants to, which I would think technically we might actually be legally not entitled to, because you can't give a grant to a church. I said if it's if the food bank is commingled in their main account.
That's something I didn't know, Mr. Richardson, but I will take that back and confirm whether in our sample of the ones we did, whether any of those were related in that way.
Okay, thank you, Neil. So any other queries or questions? No? So can I take the annual report for 23-24 as being duly noted, and that will be agreed that a copy of the report will be circulated to all members of the council for information. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. That's unanimous. Yes, of course you can, yeah. No, smiling. Just put your microphone on, Bill.
Sorry, page 285. Direct payments, waiting review. Draft report estimated 31st of the 5th, 24. Rate 5.
Yeah, I've got it now. Yeah, it's we have had the manager who would review that. She's unfortunately had to take some absence. So it's a waiting review. The draft report is ready to go and it's a waiting review. So when I report next time, it'll have an opinion in there.
Thank you. So we've agreed to note that report and it'll be circulated to all members of the council for information. The next item is the internal audit service progress against the 23-24 plan and revised annual planning methodology. Neil, over to you.
Thanks again, Chair. Yeah, I won't dwell too much on the first half of the report, which is mainly the work that we've undertaken since January, and also progress in any high importance recommendations. But then the second half of the report is more where I need your committee support on change to planning methodology. So in paragraphs 4 to 8, we summarise the types of work that's undertaken. They're covered off in the appendix at page 321. We highlight on page 315 that we've all the work that we've done, we've tried to put now some value added around sort of our consulting work in terms of why we're doing that work, because it is outside of our normal planning. And then paragraphs 9 and 10 summarise the committee's responsibility for monitoring the implementation of high importance recommendations, and the detail on those is again contained in Appendix 2. There's one in there on highways works bond reimbursements that's now been completed, so that in the course of time it's now been completed. And then the final part of the report really explains the revised annual planning process, and I've done a fairly sizable chunk, paragraphs 11 to 9, about all the sources of information we rely upon to devise the annual report plan. And then overseeing those other functions also helps to get a wide picture of where the council's risks and controls are. We then are taking account of departments' forthcoming business plans to look at areas of significant change in case they need to be built into our audit plan. What we did notice, certainly over the last part of last year, we were getting a bit wrapped up in just doing work without it coming through a prioritisation system. So what we've done is to try and provide more structure. We've restored effectively an audit needs assessment model, and that will allow us some visibility. So we'll create a structured plan with priorities in there, and then as things come on and off that plan during the year, there'll be more visibility, and we'll be able to report easier to the committee about where things have changed. So we're just going through, Matt and his other audit manager colleague are going through final discussions now with chief officers and their management teams. What we're aiming to do is take a baseline plan to Declan and Simone to get that hopefully by the end of this month. And then what we'll do then is to write to the committee to get approval on that. So we're just effectively seeking delegation to follow that process today. And that plan will give us an optimum audit coverage through the year with the resources that we have. It will be compiled and presented as a plan, and then obviously we'll see throughout the year more movement in those plans as we discuss audits coming on or coming off. I think that's all, again, all I've got to say, Chair. So.
Thank you, Neil. Has anybody got any queries or questions on that? No? Jerry, go on.
The day is young. 321. No, is it 321? Hold on, it might be 322. I've lost it now. Why is it you lose things when you're looking for them? Anyway, I was just intrigued that the Zooch Bridge is on now. Oh, they are 323, sorry. Just wonder what we're auditing. I mean, the Zooch Bridge has been on the budget for as long as I've been a county councillor. I mean, one would have thought in the audit would just say probably should have been done 10 years ago. So I just wonder what we actually auditing in relation to the Zooch Bridge.
There's some work that was done a couple of years back now, independent work, specialist work on, and it made a number of recommendations, and basically all we're doing is just following up those recommendations. So it's wider than just Zooch Bridge, it's looking at how projects are delivered and the infrastructure and governance and things like that.
Sorry, if I come back to
yeah. Please do, Jerry. Yeah.
So sorry, you're looking at all projects. So you'd be looking at things like the Records Office and the museum collections and things of that nature as well, which got particular relevance to me with my Adult and Communities Chair hat on.
No, it's not. Sorry if that didn't clarify well enough. It's purely looking at the E&T structure as to how those projects were delivered, capital projects, and things like projects initiation documents, things like that. There was a lot of recommendations made by the consultants on that.
Sorry if I may, but what we going to do with that report? Well, it seems to me that every time we put something forward, it gets turned down for the budget. So we're doing all this work on the report, which goes nowhere. I don't know.
Did you want?
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. It's not so much about whether we do or don't do Zoch Bridge. It's more about our approach to kind of big, complex capital projects and how we can just improve our kind of arrangements around that. So it's more about the process as opposed to the overall sort of end objective. If that makes sense. So if you think about E&T sort of compared to, if you go back 10 years, the project's fairly straightforward, but now you've got things like the Melton Mowbray scheme, Zoch Bridge, and some other bits and pieces. It was just, what do we need to improve in our kind of, our acquisition of kind of capital contractors and our sort of our management of those schemes to make them more likely to sort of run successfully. So it's just, like I say, it's just process kind of.
Okay, I think I'm with you, sort of, but I mean, we can keep on looking at the process, but if nothing happens and the process never happens, what was the point in looking at the project? So presumably the outcome will be the process is that we never get around to doing some of these capital things. So I appreciate budget constraints. I'm not saying we should do it. What I'm saying is, what is the point of that work if we're never going to decide to do it because we can't afford to?
It'd be applicable to other E&T highway schemes. So that, I mean, in terms of Zoch itself, it is in the process of kind of moving forward. But the work that was done, like I say, it was more the kind of the approach to kind of risk management and things like that you can take generically across any sort of big major scheme.
Okay, so if we have no other questions, then can I take it that the committee notes the annual report for 23-24 and the revised annual planning methodology for April 2024? The committee is asked to delegate to the Director of Corporate Resources authority to agree by the end of May the 24-25 internal audit plan with Chief Officer of the County Council and to email members for information. I'm happy to move the recommendation. Could I have a seconder? Yeah. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. On to item 21, independent external quality assessment, review of the council's internal audit services. Now, this is a good news story, which is nice after this morning's meeting. Neil will again introduce this item, and he is joined by Matt Davis, Audit Manager, who will take us through the report. So over to you, Neil.
Yeah, just very briefly from me, obviously, again, this relates to the public sector internal audit standards and a requirement to have an external quality assessment every 5 years. We brought some papers to the committee over the last year saying how we were going to do it, and we were supported by that. And we've now had the assessment, so I'm now going to pass over to Matt.
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, conscious of the time, so I'll be quick canter through. But it's a shame, really, because as you said, Chair, it's a really good news story. As Neil said, it's looking at the public sector, how we conform with the public sector internal audit standards. But it's not only that; it's the definition of internal audit, the core principles, code of ethics, etc. So it's quite a big piece of work. I'm not going to go through all the background. I think paragraph 6 says enough that to bring up to speed, and that is Robin Pritchard of Business Risk Solutions carried out the EQA. The scope, I've only put that table in paragraph 9 because I think it just shows the extent of the work that was involved. I mean, this is, to me, this is like the internal audit akin to an Ofsted inspection. It's quite a lot of work involved in it. I mean, even those 46 pieces of separate information we gave out doesn't really show the true story, because one of them is an audit manual of all our policies and processes, which you can imagine takes a long while to keep up to date. I think paragraph 10 is really important though, because it talks about stakeholder engagement, and I think it's appropriate for me to publicly thank everyone here that took part, because I know there are a lot of officers and some members in the room that actually took part in that. So thank you very much. As Neil said earlier, the feedback was really positive about that. The outcome is in paragraph 11, and it shows that we generally conform. Paragraph 12 is important to put in there because generally conform is quite bland, but it's the highest grade you can get. It doesn't sound it, I'll grant you, from the definition. And then adding to that, then paragraph 13, I just put in the comments from the assessor, where we graded 2.69 when the lowest he'd done was 2.19 and the highest was 2.71. So if you sort of calibrate that, it means we're well in the top 90%, 95% even. and that adds a bit more context to me to generally conforms. I asked for that to be embedded in the report itself, but because it's a moving target with the assessors as to each one they add on, he wasn't able to do that, but we have got it in the email. So linked to that, I also just very briefly wanted to pull out comparisons to the sector, or various sectors, sorry. So we were compared to local government, housing and private sector, and they looked at resources, as we've touched on this morning with Nottingham City, competency and delivery. And it said we were the highest in 2 out of those 3 areas, and second in the use of resources as well. So that was encouraging. And then just a secondary piece of comparator data, it was looking at our industry standards compared to our peers, and it looked at 12 of the standards and concluded that we were higher achieving than our peers in 10 of those areas and equal in the other 2. But we were also worth noting that we were close to excelling in 10 of them, 10 of those 12 areas, and we actually reached what they define as excelling in 2 of the areas. So that was really, really encouraging. Paragraph 18 pulls out the management summary of areas of good practice. Given the time, I don't intend to dwell on those. You'll see why, because obviously we've also got paragraph 19, which I class as the even better ifs in Ofsted language, the development areas, areas that we could do better on. And paragraph 20 obviously talks about those, because we're great. It's great that we've got such ratings, but we're not going to rest on our laurels. Neither would you want us to, I'm quite sure. I'm in the process of pulling together an action plan based on some of these recommendations, not only to address the even better ifs, but also I think to make sure we maintain and actually improve in areas where we're deemed close to excelling where that's possible. This action plan will be signed off by Simone and Neil, and Simone has quite rightly said it's her desire to come back with, or for me to come back with, timely updates to this committee as to progress against those action areas. So the full EQA report is shown in Appendix 3. Neil and I'd be happy to take questions, but I was just thinking, concluding, it's very much a result that whilst it's actually reflecting on our service, it does look far wider. It looks at, for example, the role of this committee. So it's a really positive assessment that everyone in this room, I think, should be congratulated for, not only ourselves. Happy to take questions.
Thanks very much, Mark. It's an excellent report, and despite generally conforms its audit language for there's a catch-all, I think, but it clearly is an excellent report and well done. Does anybody have any queries or questions on it? No. So the committee is after. Yeah.
Could I just put on recognition the hard work that Mark put into that for
absolutely
to get us through that?
I've
lots of blood, sweat, and tears, I think.
Yeah, good. It's unusual for internal audit to be commended at such a high level. You usually manage to dig something up that's wrong, but well done, really. Genuinely very good performance. Thanks very much. So, is the committee happy to note that report? Yeah. So, the final item is 22, the annual report of the Corporate Governance Committee 23-24. We have the inaugural annual report on the work of the committee, which will be presented to full council at the meeting in July. The report has been prepared in line with SIPFA guidance and set out a summary of the work we have undertaken and the key issues identified. This is to provide full council and the public with assurance that the committee has fulfilled its responsibilities delegated to it, and gives an overview of the assurances it has received during the year across a wide range of issues. I'm happy to recommend the report for submission to full council. Could I have a seconder? Thank you. All those in favour? Yep, that's everybody. So that's agreed. Now, thank you for your forbearance today during this committee meeting. It has been a long committee meeting. I've noted that members have commented on the volume of reading that we've got to do in 1 week, and the concerns at that level of reading, and really, if need be, we will slot in other committees, because I think it has been a long meeting, and to do it justice, and we have, we probably need to put in a couple more meetings to do it, rather than slog through for 3.5 hours. So if we could just take note of that. The we might have one in July or March next year, additional ones. The next meeting of the Corporate Governance Committee is scheduled to take place on Monday, the 16th September at 10 a.m. There are no urgent items, as I previously said, so I therefore call this meeting to a close. And thanks for your attendance and efforts. Thank you.